Through the prayers of Holy Fathers of Jesus Christ, God have mercy on us and save us. Amen. Good evening. For those new here, it's Father Joseph Swaden. I've worked in Orthodox apologetics since 1998 and the founder of NFT, True Orthodox and Ecumenical News, since 2004. We've been in the apologetic space on Facebook since 2016 and on YouTube since 2018. If you appreciate what we do here, please like and subscribe. And as always, super chats, donations, etc. Help keep the stream alive. What am I doing here? Well, I saw the Why I'm Not True Orthodox thing going up, so I decided to live review it live. But then somebody asked me if I was going to live review, Glenn Lawrence versus David Patrick Harry on Protestantism versus Orthodoxy live. And then I thought there's lots of stuff to watch live, so I'm going to just go through all of it. Good evening, Father Antonios. Good evening, Father Bus. May God bless you. And let's see what happens. I've never reviewed multiple shows at once, so I guess I'm going to start now. Let's get started. Okay. Good evening, Father Anthony. Okay. All right, so let's see what happens. So we're going to go through and see what can we watch on TV today. So I guess, let's see here. Let's start with, let me see here.
Yeah, nothing. Everybody was just going.
Okay, so
hold on.
I'm going to change the channel. Give me a second, guys.
So by the time we got up there, the fencing around there had already been taken.
Okay, so let's see what we got now.
Communion over Orthodox doctrines. These are imperfect names, so don't get offended. You know, this is like sticks and stones, right? So, like, lack of a better term, I'm just going to use it. Lack of a shorter term, I'm just going to use it. But because of sticks and stones, Father John prefers another term. He could, by all means, use it. I just want people to know, because of their use, World Orthodox jurisdictions, they don't necessarily deny being true or genuine, right? So, like, just because we're using the term World Orthodox to mean they're not true, and true Orthodox jurisdictions assert their Catholicity and canonical order.
Yeah, we do.
So I might be using, and I will be justifying the usage of the term canonically irregular in a sense that I don't think is actually even a pejorative.
But it is a pejorative.
That is not terminology they use, so should just be aware of it.
Yeah, we don't call ourselves canonically irregular for obvious reasons.
Don't cry about it. Be a big
all right. You know what? I'm going to pause. Let's see what else we can find. So let's see here.
He came to the defense of the Eastern Roman Empire, and eventually the Ottomans took it over.
See, I always thought like the whole Pope thing was such a far fetched theology to establish, because it doesn't make sense when you read it.
You completely agree. So let's go back to this one.
I don't know if there's anything else you would want to add to that, Father John.
Well, my preferred term would, instead of World Orthodox, I would prefer talking about the mainstream Orthodox.
Of course, it's about the name calling. Oh, I get it.
I think that they use World Orthodox as a pejorative, not in any kind of a just merely descriptive way.
No, that's correct. We use it. You made it up, but we use it as a pejorative.
That's
right.
You could call it mainstream Orthodox. So the way we're going to start here is I'm going to give Father John the floor. He was attacked considerably on Twitter and elsewhere. Really, for I feel no.
Yeah, both of these are on live now.
No good reason. I don't think Father John was anything but a gentleman in the last show. It's a shame for those who aren't Orthodox to.
I didn't accuse him of being uncouth. Let's go back to this tab and see what they're saying here.
The idea of a pope, because I know there was no pope before.
Exactly.
Right?
No.
And so the idea to establish one, I think the argument is it takes so many leaps and bounds to actually, make it fit, and it doesn't fit. Like it just doesn't fit. I mean, like I look at it and be like, okay.
I have no idea what they're talking about. Let's continue on.
Kind of these in-family disputes. Sometimes it gets very personal and passionate. My favorite insult to Father John is that he's a sweet old man with a white beard, and he draws you in with his voice and his very
I never said
trustworthy
this. This is
demeanor,
wrong.
and then only
This
like kind of
is-
stick the knife in. I think I have
Okay,
a
so
knife
this is
part.
like
That's a good
this is like
paraphrase of what
I never
the
said anything like that.
allegation-
None of us said anything like that. And I'm the only one who's been vocally reviewed. So we're going with insults. I get it. Switch.
Okay, so Peter is supposed to be the Pope, and he's supposed to be the, what, the incarnated version of Christ, like, as a Pope, basically.
Well,
Or
I don't think
spirit-like.
they'd go that far, but they would say that the Pope and Peter was never a Pope.
Yeah, I
But
know.
they found the authority of the papacy on what they call the seat of Peter, or
Yeah.
again, him
All
being the
right.
rock of the Roman Church. But they would call him a vicar, so he stands
vicar,
in
that's what I'm
place of
sorry.
Christ.
Yeah.
So he's
That's
a mortal man,
actually considerably.
stands in place of
That's
Christ
really
till
late,
Christ's second
Glenn.
coming,
That's
and when
like
he
11th
speaks
century
ex
stuff, 9th to
cathedra,
11th century.
this is an infallible word coming from a man who, in their perspective, God has ordained to essentially be the voice of the church.
Right. Okay. So let's get back to here.
and we'll kind of spitball the conversation from there. So,
Mm.
Father John, what do you feel you didn't get to cover in the previous show that you feel the audience should be aware when it comes to this divide between ROCOR and the True Orthodox?
Well, one example, I'm actually intending to try to write this as a blog post, maybe tonight or tomorrow, but if not next week. But Father Joseph brought up the question of my motivations for taking the positions that I've taken, and suggested that it was because
this
I
all
felt
gonna be ad
isolated
hominem?
here in Texas, even though at the time there were two Metropolitan Kyprianos parishes in the Houston area that we were in communion with. As a matter of fact, before I was made a priest and before we got a blessing to start our own parish, there was a period of about 6 months that I was serving at one of these parishes. Neither one of these parishes exist anymore. And I'll get into.
So you contributed to the destruction of True Orthodoxy in your region. That's way better. Let's continue on.
For the Orthodox, we don't believe a bishop can be infallible.
Yeah. And so this is where I would say it doesn't make sense then, even for Catholicism, right? Is that if that's the case, when did that take place? And was that after Paul punked them, for the circumcision? Like when did he get, bestowed, like, to be the speaker of Christ, or the representative?
Never. He was a bishop who was highest in the
And
taxes. That's all that it was.
Was that before or after he got checked? Because if it was before, then he got checked by Paul about when it comes to circumcision.
All right, we're gonna go back to here.
Why that is, but there was a parish dedicated to St. John St. John of Shanghai, as a matter of fact, in Cut and Shoot, Texas, which is a real place. And long story, it had something to do with a Baptist fight or something like that. I can't remember, but anyway, those 6 months that I was serving with that parish, I mean, they were good people, but I did get to see how that synod was operating on the ground, and there were a lot of things that struck me as being odd. And
Well, you've called it squirrely.
yeah,
Oh
Which
boy.
could have very negative
we're
connotations,
stopping
but
at
also could
squirrely because they're being ridiculous. Let's continue on. Let's see if they got anything extra. United all the nations through the Holy Spirit. Yep. Okay, let's go back. Should
could
we?
be a very charitable way to put it if things are really nuts.
Let's.
Um,
Yeah.
thing that I did observe, without getting into the details, is if they felt threatened, even when there were people who were not actually doing it. But if they felt like someone might say bad things about them, they would preemptively start attacking them and suggesting that they were mentally ill. And so there was an atmosphere that you could say had some cult-like aspects to it. You know, the basically,
or at the very least, a lot of negativity, right? A lot of jumping to these very negative conclusions.
And the thing is,
I mean,
like I said, these people were very sincere. As a matter of fact, the priest in Cut and Shoot, when I met him, he was actually an Antiochian deacon. I was a ROCOR deacon. And I remember having them over at my house and showing them the videos of, that were put out about the ecumenical movement by the Cypriano Synod, which I thought did a good job of exposing what was going on. And so
for those wondering, those videos are actually to some degree on the internet, on YouTube. Usually those are they show the videos of the Assisi meeting where all the ecumenists work together and pray together.
I probably had a fairly sizable role in encouraging him to go in the direction that he did, because he wound up leaving without a release and coming into that synod. And but he had a job when he came into that synod, working at a hospital. He was able to support his family with it.
All right, I'm gonna skip past and let's go back to here.
The church. So Christ is, when it comes to the schism, I look at it as like playing telephone. Remember in school, we're playing telephone, everybody's in a circle, and the one message gets spread, and then by the time it gets back around the circle, right, it's a completely different thing.
The telephone game.
That's how I look at the schisms, overall. This is maybe a very generic or watered down way to explain it, but it's the message got passed down. Orthodoxy, Catholicism spun off, right? They changed something here, and then
Protestantism changed.
They spun off and they changed something, and now you
salient
have
points,
97 different Protestant denominations. Most of them are gay, and then the other half are cucked to their wife, and they're having to be good servant leaders, and they're doormats, and so it's
I get what he's saying. He's on the way. He's making sense.
Lived where these negative things you're seeing, and
let me get back to the whole motivations thing, because
can I make one comment before you say that? And the comment was, I was very surprised based on the positive collaboration you've already had with Father Joseph, that it went negative so fast. I'm
tempted to speculate on that. It's probably better not to do it. I've known Father Joseph since he was a layman. I've never met him in person. It's all been online and by phone. But I've always had good interactions with him, and I hope that it stays that way. I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah.
And so you're saying about the negative interpretations of your motivations.
Right. So what I intend to write in my article is my motivation. I mean, my positions really haven't changed over the years very much. There was one area that I would say my opinions did change, and that's there was a time when I thought that the calendar by itself was a legitimate basis for separating from a bishop. And I did that basically on the basis of the sigilon that anathematized the new calendar. And I found out back in the 90s at some point, interacting with Father Dimitri Cosby of the OCA, who, he was a scholar on some level. I can't remember his credentials, but he had an above average education. And he was just laying out the evidence that this was a forgery. Later, there's now an article by Metropolitan Kyprianos of the old calendar group that I mentioned, no less, that also argues that it was a forgery. So basically being presented with...
This is an important point to make, because they kind of hinge everything on the 1583 sigillion, which we've gone through, or the purported 1583 sigillion. But what they don't talk about is just the absolute Catholicity of the faith, that the calendar was used everywhere. That it was understood that if you changed it to the papal calendar, you were anathematized. They don't go through any of the other documents, etc. They point simply to this one document as though we hold it as the sole formative reason we use the Orthodox calendar. And so it's just terrible. Adrian says, my comment to Craig follows. Church of America claims faithful, true Orthodox. I've never been in World Orthodox with its Ecumenism, 3 calendars, and vicious 107-year persecution of us traditionalists. Yeah, same. With the exception of 1 year I went to World Orthodoxy, I've always just lived in true Orthodoxy. The evidence is so shoddy. It is. Let's continue on.
We'll touch on that, by the way. Yeah. We'll touch on some of the details.
But being presented with evidence that disproved my position, I modified my position, which is, I think, it's not an unreasonable thing to do. Well, other than that, though, my position
it wasn't loneliness. What you're saying, it just became
okay. Well, that's great that you feel that way, but you're basing your entire worldview on one document. Let's get back to Glenn.
Yeah,
he's phenomenal. So he's Antiochian. He's in the same jurisdiction I am.
Yeah, I did. I emailed him not too long ago, and we're setting up a time when I go out to Riverside, because I'm in Los Angeles, so it's not too far of a drive for me.
He's going to go to North Church. He's going to go to an Antiochian church. That's sweet. That's nice.
Was when I was filming a movie for a guy that's Orthodox, called Marriage Made in Heaven.
Oh, yeah. And SAR. Let me
it
see
had
here.
Tom Arnold in it and Vivica A. Fox, and it was filmed in Long Beach at the Long Beach Greek Orthodox Church.
Father Antonios points out, and SAR's ecclesiology was idiosyncratic at best. Yeah, most realize they helped lead ROCOR to its demise. They're not much of a defense. We can't even get into the role that the SAR played, as almost as a shot, kind of ruiner of some kind of the the union that existed between ROCOR and the True Orthodoxy. Father, is that document a confirmed forgery? It is not. There's good evidence for it. It is not the sole document that talks about the Orthodox calendar, so they're making a mountain out of a molehill. But all right, let's go back here. Hold on.
I could not understand it. I was lost. The service.
Okay, so
I was confused.
All right, I understand. It can be confusing for a new person.
It motivated me to speak out about ecumenism. If you go to the orthodoxinfo.com site and you go to the introduction to the ecumenism section, you'll find there's a quote by a certain Deacon John Whiteford. Well, that's the same me back in the 1990s when I was a deacon, talking about why I was opposed to ecumenism. And the reason is very simple, and that's that when I discovered Orthodoxy, to me, it was discovering this great treasure that brought me what I was looking for. I knew that there was something missing in my experience of Christianity up until that point. When I found Orthodox, I thought, man, this is it. Bonanza, Eureka. Well, I'm talking to everybody who will listen practically about the Orthodox faith when I have an opportunity to do it. And I had several experiences very early on where I would talk to somebody about Orthodoxy.
What does this have to do with not being true Orthodox?
She was singing every once in a while, and then
sorry, if I'm slow with the switching, I apologize.
Like 20 minutes in English, and then communion, and I was confused. I was like, "What
was it a Greek church or Russian?"
It was Greek. It was Greek. Yeah, and I was told that because I ended up asking.
Let me see if I missed something here.
Did I come in late, or was that the
hit
whole
live?
Woo crystal stuff, How do we know this is like the true church, or like this is
his opinion
where we should be when we've heard that message so many times before?
Right,
it's true.
So I always tell people, for the first time you go to a liturgy, don't try to comprehend or understand everything that's going on. Just be there to experience it. Just witness it. Just because if you're only Protestant and you come into an Orthodox liturgical service, it's definitely going to have a different flavor and look.
All right, so let's pause here. Let's go back here. Let's hit the live.
Nazarene clergy running around. So why do you have that in the Orthodox Church? and he didn't give me an answer right away. Maybe it was a week later or something like that. But he said, I've been thinking about your question, and here's the answer. If you're a Protestant and you want to do your own thing, you can just go start your own church. You can start a new denomination. So you don't have to be a fake Nazarene. You can just.
Yeah. Okay. I want to answer this. I'm seeing. Yeah. I don't have a dog. He's talking about his opinion against ecumenism. Yeah, that's true. But what's his opinion? I don't have a dog in this fight, but it seems very convenient for the new counters. If you convince your listener that is the only document that exists for the defense of the new counter, then yeah, it is. I was in Father John's deanery and I was abused, not in the Latin way. It's actually shameful that I understood what that meant. And on Comparison's Guidance, to hear him talk about how nice I feel about being here just makes my blood boil. Wow. It's funny how quick his opinion has changed with so little evidence, yet all the evidence we show him, he throws out in doubts. Yeah, I get it. The grass is only green for him. Fair enough. All right, let's continue on. I guess we'll continue here.
Start, faith, because it's confusing to people. And so I had to very early on discover why the Hoffman people were not right. And
really talking about
Hoffman? I have pages of articles countering Hoffman claims that go back to before I was a priest. And then I have articles that I put on there back when we started having schisms inside of ROCOR. Because one thing about the Greek Old Calendar history that's, I think, important to understand is that there were two periods of time where ROCOR entered into a formal communion with a Greek Old Calendar group.
Well,
in both cases, it did not last long. And that's because on the front end, people thought, well, these people see things the same way that we do. But then we started, as we got into these relationships with these groups, we started to realize, what, they really don't have the same views that we have. They've got a different way of looking at it, a different way of approaching it. And also, their propensity to break into new schisms was particularly shocking to people in ROCOR, because ROCOR had always been able to hold it together. Well, of course, you have the OCA and the Evlogians. I mean, even ROCOR had some schisms in its history, but for the most part, we didn't have people just flying.
Okay. This is a bizarre take on ROCOR's history. They were in communion with the Greek Old Calendarists since 1969. There were divisions. They tried to heal with the Greek Old Calendarists, which they eventually did, and for the most part, it all worked out. So that's kind of silly. Live reviewing the crying post-disaster stream. Yeah, it's weird. I'm starting to like Glenn's channel video better right now. What's your opinion on Matthew Raphael Johnson? I don't have an opinion on him. Apparently, he went through a process. They were going to talk about, he remarried. He was a priest who remarried ultimately. So that's my opinion on him. And, he retired and he's doing his shows or whatever. Sorry to hear that, Nicola. Maybe Grandpa John doesn't need our attention at all, like every important man. Not sure what that means. Shock. It seems to me he's comfortable where he is and he knows he's arguing in bad faith. A little smile says it all. How can you view the schisms during the Arian crisis? That's very true. I spoke to a ROCOR MP priest today because I was looking for True Orthodox churches in my area. Gave me the canonicity argument, almost playing on supposed ignorance. It's disgraceful. Instead of talking, there are priests in Utah. There are priests in our True Orthodox synods who are constantly on the chat. I would refer to them as opposed to going to the ROCOR MP priest. The ROCOR MP priest is committed to the MP, so there's no point to that. All right, let's see if we got something.
That time was beginning to suffer from dementia, and this is it's not speculation, because even the people who objected to people talking about that later on claimed the same thing when he was being manipulated to say things they didn't like.
These are things I actually covered.
So in 1998, the Synod had met and it issued a statement. And then right after the statement had been issued, and I can't even remember the details of it, but it was sort of a moderate statement about the Moscow Patriarchate that,
which led to the 2004
that certainly did not condemn them and was expressing some hope that we would be able to eventually talk and work things out,
which led to confusion and division.
Then he issued, at least under his name, there was an epistle that was issued that contradicted everything the Synod had just said.
Yeah, that would be Metropolitan.
And that through what was a Synod internal.
We're talking about the 2000 Synod in ROCOR at this point, where Metropolitan Vitali wrote his protest. and they tried to retire him and lock him in the building and all the tragic stuff.
Debate among the bishops into a thing that was being discussed online. I think one thing that was unexpected about all that was, in the past, you might have been able to get away with something like that because people didn't have the easy means of mass communications. It used to be, there was a time when mass communications meant that you started sending faxes to different parishes to fax documents objecting to something or other, but it was very tedious to do.
Technology changed. Yep.
All of a sudden, you had the means to express your opinion instantaneously to everybody else who was online in ROCOR, and it became sort of an open war. And unfortunately, the Indiana Orthodox list was taken down several years ago, and the archives are not available to my knowledge. If anybody knows if they are available, I'd like to know, because there are a lot of things I would have liked to cut and pasted off of it. But the positions I was taking back then are essentially the same positions I've taken ever since.
God bless you.
And
that's good to hear.
We have to work out these deals. Ecumenism's bad. The Moscow Patriarchate needs to glorify the new martyrs, etc. But we're not condemning them, because the whole purpose of ROCOR is to ride out this whole period of persecution. And although we always said we are part of the Russian Church. We're not independent.
Not the Moscow Patriarchate, though. Stop it. That's not true. Let's go back to Glenn.
So faith comes before the utilization of our rational faculties. That's partly what we would argue with one of the problems with Protestantism, because the Enlightenment was all
God bless
about
your
the
church.
elevation of
Hopefully,
reason as
there's
the
a church
ultimate
near you.
faculty
True
of man,
Orthodox
that
church.
we can come to ultimate conclusions about the world and how it works, knowledge, theology, philosophy, through the observation of nature. So natural theology, natural philosophy, and just the instrumental use of reason. The Orthodox Church doesn't start there.
There's
so the Orthodox
nuns
Church,
that
unlike
are some online
Christian
as well,
West,
who would be able to
we
correct
didn't
you better.
have the development of scholasticism that the Catholic Church did, which eventually leads to the development of what we would consider today philosophy. So coming to ultimate truth claims without, again, a sort of presuppositional beginning of God. So you can be an atheist and you can participate in philosophical discourse of ultimate forms of knowledge. Scholasticism was a privileging of Aristotelian logic and Aristotle.
How does one reconcile the idea that
theology and Christianity? Then you have the Reformation.
Well, he's denying that he's not even referencing the Free Russian Orthodox Church
really
at all.
What's often considered the most magical, the most magical century in European history is the 1500s, so the 16th century.
Okay, that's true. But that had to do with the printing press. We get it, and the Renaissance.
That's always been my desire, and I've always been my desire has been to remove these obstacles.
Well, what about the
so just like I think it's wrong that the new calendar was introduced the way that it was introduced. I certainly think that the Ecumenical Patriarchate and the Patriarch of Alexandria have done a lot of things that are objectionable, and there are things that the Antiochian Patriarchate has done that I'm not a big fan of too. But that doesn't mean that we pull up the drawbridge and start preparing the boiling pitch and go to war with.
How come he's not bringing up the simple fact that ROCOR helped bring thousands, hundreds of thousands of Orthodox Christians in Russia to its communion through the Free Russian Orthodox Church? It's like he pretends that doesn't exist, that they have been working in the region since 1990. It's like the souls of all those people mean nothing to him. It's just about official union with the MP. John continues, his whole argument was to say ROCOR's sole purpose was to stay away from communism. When it was to preserve the savor of orthodoxy. Let's see if he has more to say on this.
With the entirety of the rest of the church, just because there are some parts of it that have some serious issues. So that's my motivation, is I want people to become Orthodox.
Right, because he sees the unity of the church as based in Constantinople and Alexandria. Meanwhile, the Moscow Patriarch has made inroads in Alexandria. There's true Orthodox all over the world, in Greece and Bulgaria and Romania and Russia and Africa and basically everywhere, South America. The point is, what he's saying is he's talking about the brand. He's talking about the brand again, the assembly brand. It's not, that doesn't necessarily mean the criterion for orthodoxy, and it's silly.
Orthodox, because that's where the truth is.
You know, Father John, before I get into my prepared notes, do you have some talking points you want to go through, or you want to do them interdispersed with the PowerPoint we have?
Yeah, we can just start going through your PowerPoint, and as things pop up, we can talk about them.
Excellent. All right. So we're going to now bring that on screen, and we get smaller. Sorry about that, guys. And so before I get started, I want to make an apology. All right. And it's an apology for the format, which I've been doing for more than half a decade now. Just
kind of brother, stop it.
Like, I'm a YouTuber. I
so
didn't even really set out to be
cheesy.
YouTuber, but we've been doing these videos for a long time. You're one of the first ones, Father John, on the Formula
Okay, stop.
But it's one of the
you know what? You're not fun to watch. I'm going to put Glenn back. All right, let's see. A lot of mumbling that had to deal with that.
And we are very
this is way more for these guys are actually. Here's my thing. At least they're being sincere in this broadcast. I will say that. Now, once I get my emotions under control, I'll put them back.
You have regarding that topic.
Okay.
You have writings of
saints, they only have services on big feast days. That we got to talk about Typica. Waiting for some books.
Or the Serbian world. Okay. And so our non-for-profit is trying to translate.
Okay, very good.
Essentially, the lingua franca of the world.
Speak how he didn't.
Time you could get access to all these visions and these prophecies into English. So we do believe there is still prophecy. Not in regards to the dogmas of the church or the changing of the church, but
do you think like somebody could give you an inspired word, like randomly?
This is interesting.
Say that again. Can somebody give me an inspired
word? I want to see what David
bump into a stranger and they're like, God told me to tell you something, like.
If they phrased it that way, maybe I would raise my eyebrows, but I certainly believe that God's providence works through people. So I've had experiences where somebody was the right person at the right exact time.
That's the common experience.
That maybe
not the Jesus spoke in my ear. All right, so let's go back to this.
I've had in this channel for a long time is having multiple views represented, and it's sort of between a roundtable and debate where I ask these purposely kind of tough questions, but not too tough, to both sides, and kind of tease out the opinion there. And so this is not the show we had together last time. Wasn't like the first time this was ever done, or a format that should have surprised anyone. For example, Father John and Father Joseph's first collaboration was precisely that sort of format.
I've talked about
I had a show called Nicaea 25, Eastern Orthodox, Oriental Orthodox Communion all the time. Is the same side that got all self-righteous about this and couldn't try to look at this in the most positive way, which is really what we tried setting out to do, and we have done on this channel before.
That's what it is.
Now, that doesn't mean I'm perfect. I try my best. And so knowing how it unfolded now, I would not, if he said, I want to speak to Father Peter, I would have said, no, you can speak to him afterwards if you want to. We got to go back to our scheduled program. But again, hindsight's 2020.
And
why is Father Peter like under this guard? Like you can't really talk to him, and it's like, oh, okay. But the 1 second he shows up, and I decide, okay, I'll answer this guy. Now they're all upset. It's kind of dumb, but okay, whatever. That's
Also didn't plan on my internet crapping out on me, and that's the reason why you brought him on. I was as surprised as Father Joseph was when I got back on that Father Peter was there, and when I later watched the video, it was kind of funny. When he popped in.
When he dropped out, I looked down and there he was. I didn't even know he was there. So he happened to click the link at the same time he dropped out.
Okay.
But it's for those like, well, you should have anticipated it would unfold this way. I had a very good history with this format, Father Joseph. He's been at least 2 shows that followed this format. I've spoken privately at length with Father Joseph over years now, personal stuff, all sorts of things. I have no reason to suspect this would be so profoundly upsetting. It just shows you, it's like, you know what it is, Father, you've probably seen enough. You've taken enough confessions over the decades too. You get to the point you don't get surprised by anything anymore. Why people do what they do and what they do. But I had no rational reason to suspect that this would be so upsetting. And so I apologize that I'm imperfect. I could have made better decisions, but I stand by the format. I have nothing more to add about it. And I ask people should presume the best because it's actually detrimental to everyone's salvation to presume the worst. There's all sorts of accusations we can be making now about those making accusations against us, and we're not. And that's why we should presume the best, presume it's just it's a misunderstanding, and one that honestly tests the limits of my, of my judgment, but I'll just presume it's a misunderstanding because of just really bad judgment.
Yeah.
So someone here is making bad judgment,
100%
maybe me,
here.
presuming it's a misunderstanding. Now, all that aside, let's get into the bread and butter. And just so people know, if you make insults about us or anyone else here, if I see them, being that I'm not going to be doing full-time moderation, you're going to be kicked. So please don't. Let's be respectful.
That's interesting.
Now, that being said, I want to
look
start with, before I get into a critique, what I believe the true Orthodox are correct about. Because there's a reason why, just to say there's schism, they're ucky, they're bad about everything, they're squirrely. We get all sorts.
I'm going to pause him so we can, because I know this is the beginning of his argument against True Orthodoxy, so let's devote some meat to it. Let's see what they're doing on the other channel.
But was exactly what I needed to hear in that moment. And I believe that was God's prophecy or providence, and that God can use people to meet us where we're at in our lives at any particular time. Would I consider them a prophet? Absolutely.
No.
Yeah,
Not the office of a prophet.
Yeah.
But to use a vessel to be
Absolutely.
Okay.
And that's really the point of Orthodoxy, is that we believe in a doctrine that is it's referred to sanctification and different sects of Protestantism. So I grew up Methodist, and John Wesley, he had a bit of an admiration for St. Macarius the Great, and read some of the Orthodox saints and read about this doctrine called theosis, which is really the ultimate central emphasis of Orthodox spirituality. And this is the idea that the goal of being a Christian, which just means a little Christ, is to become like Christ. The question is how you do that.
That's what the Catechism referred to them in Nero's historical. He was a historian for Nero, and he references Christ, the Christians, as referencing Christ.
Right.
That's one of the first texts outside of the Bible that references Jesus and his crucifixion, from what I understand. Because I had this I always get skeptical. I'm like, okay, crazy person over there telling me some weird Jesus story, right? Until it happened, right? I was on a flight to St. Louis at an overlay in Dallas. I don't look like I would go to church. The people look at me all the time. You're tatted up, neck down. You're gonna mug me, right? I get profiled more than black people do. Okay, I'm not joking. So I'm in the airport. I have a layover, and I'm gonna go have dinner with a friend at a 4-hour layover. And I'm walking out, and here's this cop standing there by the exit. He's like, "You, come here." And I'm like, "Here we go, random search." And he starts "You have the heart of a pastor," going off, and God's telling me to. I'm sitting there bro, you don't even know me. Mind you, I'm going to St. Louis. I was sponsored by First Forum, but shortly after that, I was going to Kansas City, where I had our yearly pastoral leadership conference for the church that I was working at as a youth pastor. I had nothing on me that says Jesus is Lord or anything along those lines. It was just super random. And then I was just now I'm one of those weirdos that have a story. Now, do I believe them or do I not? So I agree with you. God will use anybody to give you the message that you.
I gotta admit, Glenn and David's, interview here is making this so much more positive. But now we're gonna get to the meat of. I guess this is why he thinks we're right or wrong. Or let's go.
Sorts of directions about that, but there are legitimate things, and I want to bring these legitimate things to the table. These are legitimate things that ROCOR still stands for today. Now, the Council of Constantinople 1582. Now, everyone hears about the sigilon of 1583, which, yes, is a forgery of sorts. It's made of real documents. much of them are from Constantinopolitan councils from the era, and some of them from actually Cairo-Lucaris, so shortly afterwards. These are a few decades afterwards.
Cairo-Lucaris.
This kind of compilation of contemporary documents, sort of like the Orthodox version of a pseudo-Isidorian decretal. But it's a combination of real documents. But the Constantinople 1582, Israel, just like there was the Constantinople 1593, there were real councils, and we do have preserved a part of the council which bans changes to the Menaion. So it's not just to the Nicene canon on Pascha.
Right. He agrees that's valid. This is a good question. What did Father Peter say about papists? Well, what Father Peter said ultimately in his argument was that we have to go by who has been condemned directly by the councils, but also those who fall under existing conciliar anathemas. This is in response to me asking, what about the Roman Catholics, since you don't see an actual full condemnation of the papists till Blockernay in 1285. However, he said he had responded they were already under the condemnation of the Eighth Ecumenical Council. Using that logic, you therefore can say anyone who falls under previous condemnations, whether it's Roman Catholics, Protestants, or New Calendarists, are therefore under the condemnation of the councils. John says Sigilon is a forgery because a monk woke up and decided to make a forgery. Yeah, I'm leaving that one untouched. I just don't know. They just love ecumenism and won't take off their rose-colored glasses. Yep. Saints Nectarius and Saint Theophan of Poltava both confirm the Sigillion. Again, that's not the only document. I do want to point this out, and I want to make this clear. I'm not even saying that I believe that the Sigillion's a forgery. I don't. But what I am saying is that if you make it all about one document, you're missing the Catholicity of the church. You have to look at all the documents of the time. You have to look at all of the statements of the patriarchs at that time and later. It is very important because otherwise they will stick you with this one document. You'll believe it's the one document, and that's not how the church thinks. Unsurprisingly, you think these people think that heresy is just another sin like lying. So if you condemn a heretic, you're a Donatist, and now every Orthodox is a Donatist. Congratulations and welcome to their debate technique of the past 10 years. Let's continue.
Also makes mention of the Menaion, and we do know that both the Patriarch of Constantinople and his synod and the Patriarch of Alexandria were there. We're not aware from the extant evidence of any other synods otherwise endorsing this synod, but it does show we do have a synod, and it did teach against the change in the calendar,
many
and
times.
it specifically also condemned change the calendar because how it would affect the Menaion. And so I just want to bring this up because a lot of the way the new calendar issue has kind of skirted around supposed liability for violating canonical precedent is like, well, we don't violate the Nicene canon, right? We the Paschalian is the way it's supposed to be. It's just everything else that's screwed up. And but we do have some precedent, conciliar precedent, that no, you can't change the Menaion either. And so
they're
I would say
connected.
they are on a factual basis correct. We have no reason to reject 1582 as something that's inconsistent with the Orthodox tradition. If anything, we look at local councils when we lack, let's say, a purely consensus statement to try to get an idea of what the earlier precedents are to discern what the Orthodox tradition is on a given question. Now, that being said, when the new calendar first was pretty much endorsed by the Constantinopolitan Patriarchate, it wasn't immediately accepted by everyone. It's still not accepted by half the Orthodox world. And this is what surprised me, Father John. Someone actually said to me, wait, there's canonical Orthodox jurisdictions on the old calendar? Like someone asked, and like they apparently think everyone's OCA in the Greeks, and that's it. They've never seen.
They changed the subject. I was about to go all in on it. They changed the subject.
Any other church, but no, more than half the Orthodox world still in the old calendar, and that's within the canonical world Orthodox body.
That's a you problem.
Before Alexandria went into the new calendar, they had a council in 1924. The following is a quotation from the council, where they say, it is not wholly accurate for your eminence, this writing to Constantinople, to maintain that such a correction, that is to the calendar, by you would have no dogmatic or canonical impediments. Right? And so it shows you that other jurisdictions at the time would have thought the Nicene canon, or perhaps this Constantinopolitan Council in 1582, would have not allowed any modification whatsoever to the calendar. All right? So when a true Orthodox says changing the calendar was not just, imprudent, it was really wrong, you could disagree, Father. And I don't speak for a bishop or anyone else. I'm just giving my historical opinion, which is I would say they are factually correct historically, that the change of the calendar is not justifiable in the Orthodox tradition.
Well, what I would say about it is that I don't think that a council that was essentially a local council, and I don't think they declared the calendar to be changed to be heretical, but in any case, I don't think a local council could say forever the church can never modify the calendar. I do think that
what the council taught was you can't modify the Pascalian and the Babylonian, or however you pronounce it.
Right, but it was a local council that wasn't a pan-Orthodox council, and the thing of it is, it's a disciplinary question. It's not a matter of dogma, and so if you had a council that was actually representative of the entire church, and if they agreed to change the calendar, it would be something that.
How about this? We have a council. Every council of the entire church was on the same calendar.
Theoretically could happen. I don't think it's going to happen. Certainly not in my lifetime. But I think it's at least a theoretical possibility. But the whole purpose of a calendar, a liturgical calendar, is you want people to be celebrating feast and keeping fast together. And even after the Council of Nicaea, it took something like another 300 or more years before you got everybody on the same page. So back in Nicaea, they knew that the calendar.
All right. Sometimes it gets so frustrating to hear the propaganda, but we have a different stream we can listen to. Let's do that.
You need to know when you need to know it. I mean, it says like even the rocks cry out, right? Right. So if a donkey's ass could, speak.
Yeah, Barlam's ass. Yeah.
I think it's one or the other.
Then some cop that doesn't know me could do the same thing. But how realistic is this? Do these happen? Is it frequent? Is it like, because now anybody could say that, oh yeah, I've been told by, so-and-so who said they had a message for me for Christ. And then now we're having this, issue of whether or not it happened or whether or not it's sound, whether or not it was inspired by God, or it was just like, how does the Orthodox Church choose to vet the information like that, like given?
Well, it obviously would have to accord with the tradition. So novelty, that's one of the differences. So Catholic generally means universal or whole, and Orthodox is correct.
Yep.
So even though we refer to ourselves as the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church, Catholic just means universal or whole in that sense. But the kind of point of emphasis of Orthodoxy is we don't change things. That's the whole point of it, is that we want to preserve the tradition of the church fathers. And that's kind of the whole point of Orthodoxy. So if somebody has an inspired word, as me as an Orthodox, can some random Protestant have an inspired word for me? Potentially.
But probably not.
We would say the spreading or the inspiration or prophecy in general has to do with the noetic clarity of the individual, which gets back to this doctrine of sanctification. Theosis is what we call it.
Right.
So when you meet, for example, St. Paisios, there's so many stories of, he's a more recent saint from Mount Athos.
No, he's not.
Where people would come to him and he would already know the sins. He would already know what they're dealing with.
Yeah.
Be able to speak to people languages.
There's a system for that they use so that they can glean. It's not unlike people who play 3-card Monte. If you know how a person reacts and you watch them and you have assistants to help with the mark, it's very easy to look like you have foreknowledge of what they're actually doing. But in any case, let's go back to these guys.
Julian calendar had a drift over time because they actually changed the date that the equinox was calculated on, because I believe the original Julian calendar had the equinox on March the 25th. And by the time of the Council of Nicaea, it had shifted astronomically to March the 22nd. So they actually did change the date that the equinox was calculated as happening, but they didn't change the calendar as a whole. So that just affected the Pascalian, but not anything else. And it took, like I said, there was a controversy. If you ever read St. Bede's
This is actually untrue. There is a book called the Typicon, which Father John's priest and the ROCOR MP, Father Alexander Lebedeff, explained in detail how the Typicon governs each day of the year using the Pascalian, which then spreads out to how the rest of the Menaion is calculated and how the services are done. And with the new calendar, the book had to be thrown out the window. None of the calculations would work unless you kept a Gregorian Menaion, which means that in order for the new calendar to work, excuse me, for the new calendar to work with the Paschalian, and you change it, the entire thing changes. You have the Roman Catholic calendar.
The people in Church of England, this was an issue in St. Bede's time, and I believe he was 7th century, if I remember correctly. It might even have been 8th century, but actually, it might have been like before his time, but close enough to his time that it was still a hot issue. He talks a lot about this whole controversy. And the Synod of Whitby, I think, was the council in Great Britain that got most people on the same page, but it still took a while for some of these people to come along entirely. So the problem is, why would you, for the sake of astronomical act?
Memento Mori asks, what's DPH's stances on TO? Is he neutral? I recall he had Bishop Maximus of the GOC Canada show, but he caught some flack for it. Yeah, he did. I don't know, how he feels. My view is, my interactions with him have been positive. He had a great show with Bishop Maximus. So I don't know what his stance on us is, but my stance on him is we're going to treat him as charitably as possible. He's clear that he's serious about his faith, so we'll see what he does. Memento flat out calls us schismatics. Well, that would be a shame. But what are you going to do? We still have to pray for him. St. Bede in his writings on time stated, we should note the passage of solar time for the planting and harvesting of crops, but stick to the church calendar for fasting and feasting. That is correct. Let's continue.
Accuracy, then take this unity that had been achieved over centuries at great difficulty, and then say, hey, let's just modify it because we want the calendar to be accurate. That doesn't make sense. So it was never a good idea, and it's certainly been very divisive and caused lots of unnecessary problems.
And apparently, the Julian calendar has certain.
Thank you so much for your donation on the stream. Thank you for the stream. It's nice to watch after work. Feels like a Sunday. Well, it feels like I feel like I'm watching some sort of quasi television. But thank you so much for that donation and for keeping every donation and super chat helps keep the lights on. So please, I don't usually ask for the assistance except on Sundays. I try to keep it to that except for emergencies. But yeah, thank you for all the assistance. We really could use it. All right, let's continue.
Depends what you base a calendar upon, but there are actually certain aspects of Julian calendar that are more accurate. And so it's
one of the advantages of the Julian calendar is it repeats every 400 years, I believe. So all the cycles repeat entirely, whereas with the Gregorian calendar, it takes like more than 1,000 years for everything to repeat. And I think what you're referring to is there is scientifically, they refer to the Julian date, and that is based on the Julian calendar, and that's partly because that was the original solar calendar that was used in the Roman Empire, and it makes it a lot less complicated to talk about a date that's based on a calendar that goes back to the beginning of when we had such a calendar, rather than making date shifts in the middle of the process.
There's apparently an additional scientific argument that celestially there's a sense in which it's more accurate if your reason for measuring is not seasonal but some other astronomical thing. I'm not a scientist.
Yeah.
But my point to say is that the consensus of saints is what's binding. So obviously a local council isn't in of itself binding because there's all sorts of local councils, particularly in the Second Millennium Church, which aren't treated in this way.
It's also worth noting, and this is just a scientific fact, the traditional church, the Julian calendar, is actually used in calculations when dealing with space travel. So, just so you know.
That being said, without any contradicting councils and with follow-up Concepolitan councils that did actually have the synodical acceptance of everyone, it does, which by the way, they did not talk about the Menaion and those other councils. It does at least show this is the world that those councils were coming from, and that altering the Menaion isn't something you could do willy-nilly. It's part of the conciliary tradition of the church, even if it's not a pan-Orthodox council and it's not binding in the same sense that a pan-Orthodox council is.
And basically, every church that adopted the new calendar, there was something fishy about each instance. Because like Meletios Metaxakis was a Mason, and he actually had been defrocked by the Church of Greece because I think he venerated a Episcopal church's altar while he was vested at Amantia or something like that. And so he definitely had heretical ideas. Although it's interesting that the Russian Church abroad didn't break communion with him over those things. but he wound up being run out of town on a rail after he got the Ecumenical Patriarchate to adopt the new calendar. I think the Church of Greece adopted it at the same time. And part of that was because the current government in Greece wanted everybody to switch to the new calendar because it made things easier in terms of civil matters, because now they were in sync with the rest of the world instead of being on the Julian calendar. Because basically Orthodox countries were all on the Julian calendar up until the Bolshevik Revolution, and then this calendar change being introduced. But the Church in Russia, of course, kept the old calendar liturgically, but the government changed it to the Gregorian calendar after the communists took over.
Now, someone asked, I'm sorry.
Well, then Meletios Metaxaki somehow manages to get elected as the Patriarch of Alexandria, because Alexandria didn't even send a representative to that council that adopted the new calendar in Constantinople. Neither did Jerusalem or Antioch. And then now all of a sudden Alexandria, which was opposed to the calendar change, suddenly adopts the calendar. And I think that was because of British influence. And the Antiochians didn't change, I think, until 1946. And if you get a copy of the Nasser 5-pounder, as it's affectionately called, the service book by Father Seraphim Nasser, if you look at the table of contents, the last thing in the book is a defense of the church calendar. But if you actually go to the end of the book, you'll find that page is not there because the Antiochians didn't modify the table of contents, but they took out that article because he was defending the old calendar.
Now, I don't know if it's true, but there's a rumor on Twitter that Patriarch Daniel of Bulgaria is floating the idea of putting Bulgaria entirely back in the old calendar. Just so people are aware, the United States, Bulgarian Patriarchate is on the old calendar.
Here we go again.
Bulgaria, it's in the new calendar.
That would be wonderful if he did that. I think the Church of Poland actually did that a couple of years ago. So it'd be nice if we get a trend of people going in the right direction. Maybe it might put more pressure on the other churches to do the same.
And when they close down the OCU, then maybe they could go back to the correct calendar. But yeah, that being said, someone asked, no super chat, and we don't monetize your questions. So if I see good questions, we will star them and cover them later. If it's a bad question, I don't care how much money you donate to the Cambodian mission, we will not ask the question. But that being said, we give everyone a chance. There's no money involved. So instead of paying for play, make a donation at the goodness of your heart, orthodoxchristiantheology.com/donate. All right. So that being said, we talked about the calendar issue. And generally speaking, we agree it was wrong that they changed the calendar, and we look hopefully that there'll be some reversal and return to the Julian calendar, at least to the point there's a pan-Orthodox council where if they really felt it was so compelling to update the Menaion and everything based on some sort of astronomical thing, then it would do so. But it's not really, we're nowhere close to where that would be actually so compelling would have to be done.
I can't imagine a scenario in the foreseeable future where adopting a calendar change would not continue to be a divisive thing in the church.
Yeah, it wouldn't be necessary, I feel. I'd say just go back to the Julian calendar, and hopefully that brings one less impediment for bringing back most, not all,
the
Syriac Orthodox.
Very simple.
You sometimes hear new calendars will say, well, in 10,000 years, you're going to be celebrating Christmas in July. Well, it's actually more like 40,000 years or something like that. They sometimes will give it some ridiculously short period of time that this change will happen. Well, it's like more than 40,000 years from now. We will be celebrating Christmas in July if we're still on the Julian calendar.
And supposedly the rotation of the Earth is actually changing in speed, and so this will affect the supposed calendar changes anyway. So this new calendar is going to come inaccurate anyhow.
Right, but the thing of it is if that happens, that means the people in the southern hemisphere will get to have Christmas in the wintertime. So it will be fair. And in another 40,000 something years, it will happen that we'll just go right back to where we were. So just hang on long enough, and we'll all be on the same page again.
Mm-hmm.
So we have my reasons, again, not Father John. So Father John could disagree. But we have my reasons for what the True Orthodox are correct about. One is I could see them saying the ROCOR didn't get their pound of meat in the Moscow Patriarchate reunion. And usually speaking, when there is a reconciliation, a legitimate one, there's generally some sort of repentance. And the MP ROCOR reunion kind of didn't really have that for either side. There's this kind of toleration of a parallel jurisdiction because there's MP churches where there's ROCOR churches and stuff like that.
Here's the reason why I think that made sense, though, and that's that the Russian church in the year 2000 did issue a statement in which they condemned what we were calling Sergianism. They condemned that as a okay way to govern the church when you're under persecution.
How did they condemn it, if you don't mind getting
They issued a statement on the relationship between church and state, and they said you can do these things, but you can't do those things. Well, the things that they said you can't do are what we called Sergianism.
Got it.
And the thing is
that's not accurate.
People who were still around, when the reconciliation happened, these were not people who you could credibly accuse of having had a hand in having people lined up and shot by the KGB. And I know Father Joseph repeatedly said that the bishops of the Moscow Patriarchate were responsible for the murders of millions of people. I just haven't seen any evidence to that effect. You can show me, and I've seen evidence of some bishops that acted in ways that were not particularly courageous, and you can even say were shameful. But I don't know of any instance of a bishop saying, hey, I think it'd be a good idea to go line those people up and shoot them.
Okay.
Or here, let me hold your coat while you go shoot them. I don't know of any situations like that. And so the thing of it is,
I mentioned that when I was talking to him that Bishop Luke of Simferopol actually reported people to the authorities, which led to their arrest or their death.
I think it was the year 2003, but we had maybe it was 2005, but we had an all diaspora council. And at that council, we had 3 representatives of the Moscow Patriarchate, including then Archimandrite, but now Metropolitan Tikhon Shevchenov. And when you heard people who struggled to maintain their faith during the Soviet period, and they were facing much more difficulties than we were in freedom. It's easy to be an armchair confessor, in the United States in the safety of your mom's basement and talk about what those people should have done.
Yeah,
people like Metropolitan Tikhon Shevchenov, they lived through that period. They dealt with things like being threatened because of their faith and suffering persecution, and they struggled and got past that. Would it have made sense for us to demand someone like Metropolitan Tikhon Shevchenov to bow
like, you know, every time we look for, you know, every time they look for somebody, they have to keep digging to find somebody more virtuous than the last guy, because, you know, every time they used to say this argument. He used to say with what's his name, with the previous Ecumenist guy that was Kirill's replacement, not Tikhon Shekhinov, but it was the other guy, the one who was Ecumenist with a great beard and apparently got caught in a big scandal in Europe recently. Now let's take a look here at Tikhon Shekhinov. Why is this guy special? Let me see here. Tikhon is often referred to as the personal confessor of Russian President Vladimir Putin. Well, that was easy. Let's continue on.
Down and repent because of the sins of Metropolitan Sergius? I don't think so. I don't think that would have been a just verdict, and it would have been an unnecessary impediment to reconciliation, because I think that you could say that every part of the Russian church that broke into pieces after the Russian Revolution, there's things that they did that would be capable of being criticized, and you could say that shouldn't have happened. But when you get to the other end of the persecution, unless you have some specific bishop that you could say this bishop did this betrayal and they should be deposed, it doesn't make sense to demand people to get down on their knees. And who are we to demand they apologize to us when we were living in freedom in the United States and they were suffering under the Soviets? It doesn't make sense.
Yeah,
it might make sense if we still had people who actually lived through the Soviet persecution. They would certainly be in a better position to challenge people in Moscow Patriarchate. But by the time 2007 came along, we didn't have people who had experienced those things. We just had memories of people who'd come before us that had experienced those things, and that's quite a different story. So I think approaching it in terms of recognition and mutually asking for forgiveness and giving each other forgiveness, and now trying to work together was the way forward. And the thing is, I know of some people who were skeptical about reconciliation.
Okay. I'm sorry. I can only take so much before I have to switch to a much more positive stream. So I'm changing the channel again. Let me see here. Yep, that's true. Yeah, true. All right. So let's switch this over. And let's see here, because
he knew that he could speak, or that
changing the channel when I can't take anymore.
God, but him having embodied what we call these uncreated energies. So if you ask a Protestant or a Catholic, depending on their knowledge of theology, like, do you directly engage with God? They probably would say yes to the Holy Spirit, but theologically, this is a huge point of debate. And this is where Palamas and Thomas Aquinas were debating on how we understand these things. And so for Aquinas, these were analogies. So when you engage in love, this is like the love.
Did they live at the same time?
It's not the love of God. Now, Orthodox, we say something very different. And Palamas is one of our saints and church fathers that was explicit about what's called the energy essence distinction. So we do not believe you can make positive, or what's referred to as cataphatic, claims about the essence of God. That is beyond rational apprehension. That is beyond utilization of language itself. But what we can talk about are the energies that are natural to the Godhead. So logic, reason, compassion, long-suffering, mercy, honor, glory. We would say these energies are the only things that actually exist, and they are natural to God, and they come from God, and creation was built through these energetic realities. And so just like the law of thermodynamics, we have terms like hot and cold, but really the only thing that's going on there is the dissipation of thermodynamic energy. So cold is a term we use for the absence of heat.
Yeah.
The only energy that's there is heat. And this is the same way that we understand creation itself. So we don't believe like evil has an ontological existence. It doesn't have a reality in and of itself. It's the absence of God.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
So
yeah.
So
but
that's
like, so it'd be like hell is not like, it would be like saying hell is not like it's just that it's
absence of heaven,
away from God's presence.
Yeah.
Like not having his presence. That would be like hell.
This is such a better stream. I want to finish this stream because this one. Let's continue on.
Come to see it as a positive thing. It's certainly.
Well, let me interject if you don't mind. Why I feel pound the meat from the ROCOR perspective. Sergianism is not mentioned in the church and state document. We'll get into some detail about what it does cover when we're part of that presentation. But it
doesn't use the word Sergianism, but interesting. I didn't know this prior to having some back and forth and doing some research on this subject. But St. John of Shanghai never used the word Sergianism or Sergianist in any of his writings. And his history of ROCOR would have been a great opportunity for him to have used it if he was inclined to do so. And he never used it. I think that tells us something.
It's. But I have to finish my point.
Okay.
I mean, I hate to say this, but I feel like I'm just reliving the last week over and over and over. I mean, this was his argument on Twitter after the video. You know, it's kind of crazy that it's like he has to go after, you know, what St. John said. He tried to present St. John as being loyal to the Moscow Patriarchate, which is insane. Yeah. All right, let's continue.
What I believe the True Orthodox are correct about the pound of meat. For them to more just like how the Church of Serbia went back into union with the Church of Macedonia for one day for granted monocaphy the next day. For them to say, yes, Sergianism is wrong, right? We've, again, gone a long way to kind of deal with some issues, which we're still dealing with, like the reverberations of we have one person mentioning, I don't know if it's accurate, but I'll just presume that it is, you know, Patriarch Kirill calling Patriarch Sergius a confessor.
Good question.
Like, you know, again, if we could all get behind, like, no, he was bad and he did the wrong thing, then this would have solved some of those issues. So I do feel the reunion could have got more of its pound of meat per se. And so that's what I mean by pound of meat.
Yeah, but I just don't know that would have accomplished anything positive, and it probably would have made reconciliation
harder because they didn't believe
reconciliation when we did. One thing that I think is important is, you know, there is such a thing as historical perspective. And we acknowledge, if you study history, we acknowledge that when you get further away from the emotions of a historical event, it's easier for people to talk about it in an honest way. And for a bishop who lived through the Soviet period, you could see why they might have felt like they needed to defend Metropolitan Sergius because you know, their church was being attacked by people all the time, and they didn't see Metropolitan Sergius as being this evil villain that they portrayed him to be. But the thing is, I don't think you're going to see Metropolitan Sergius glorified as a saint. I think if someone was to try to push that through, it would not happen.
Father Ambrose is saying in his PhD's Moscow that Stalin personally edited letters on behalf of Metropolitan Sergius. So it's yeah, it's probably not good if an atheist is writing your stuff.
Well, the thing is, though, what were the circumstances that he was living under? I mean, it's not like he was just freely saying, "Hey, Uncle Joe, why don't you edit my letters?" You know, he you know, Stalin was a very scary figure, and that's why when they had the Communist Party congresses, when people started clapping and Stalin's speech, no one wanted to be the first person to stop clapping because they might wind up getting a visit about 3 o'clock in the morning and carting it off, and no one would ever see them.
The first person to start clapping either.
Well, you know, so it's easy for us to say he should have done this, he should have done that. The thing is, if you're ever in that situation, I'll expect great things from you. But St. John of Shanghai, who's I think not just your average saint, even I think that he's an exceptional saint. His history of the Russian Church abroad gives a very charitable accounting of Metropolitan Sergius, and he's very sympathetic. He doesn't say that everything that he did was okay. He doesn't defend everything that he did, but he doesn't say this louse of a heretic, of a scum, you know. Because I think St. John had the humility to know, hey, if I was in that situation, I might have done the same thing. I mean, he probably wouldn't have, but I mean, he probably thought that to himself. I might, you know, he had enough humility to tell himself that anyway. You know,
we should always say apart from the grace of God, that could be any of us,
right.
Of course.
And you know, back during some of the days when it seemed like the more extreme factions in ROCOR might actually be the ones that would wind up carrying the day in ROCOR. I remember being at a missions conference, and they had a guest speaker who was Father George Lauren, who was the father of recently reposed of Sister Vasa Lauren. But Father George Lauren was not a liberal. He actually knew St. John as a boy in Shanghai. He was a very pious priest, but at that time he expressed very negative views of the Moscow Patriarchate, and I was uncomfortable with it at the time listening to him talk. But one thing that struck me though, about, you know, he was talking about they did this.
Wait a second. Oh, this is bad. Okay, hold on. I think my live streams have been destroyed. Wait, let's go back here.
Created energy of God, right? So these energies are uncreated. They pre-exist creation itself.
Yeah.
And the point as an Orthodox Christian is to embody these energies and enact them in a personalized way out into the world. So, for example, we've never met in person.
Yeah.
And we've come to know each other as persons based on how I speak, how I dress, how I move, things I've made, all of which are energetic expressions of who I am.
Yeah.
And so that's how we as persons made in the image of God come to know other persons. It's through energies. And so the same phenomenon, that's how we come to know God, is through his energies. And we believe that you have a direct relationship with God through these energies, these uncreated energies. And the point then of becoming a saint, which is the goal, should be the goal of every Christian, is to embody these and enact them out into the world more and more. So if you're filled with energies that are uncreated, how could you die when you die? You can't.
Yeah.
Right. And this is what a holy person is. And so if you're embodied these energies, you're going to begin to glow. So many saints within the Orthodox Church, and this is why iconography.
I think I'll stop at that one and kind of.
Because that's almost disappeared entirely in the West. You don't even see this in a lot of pretty much anywhere, I would say. I don't see the United States other than monasteries.
Let me see if I can. I'm going to go back. Okay, so this is what we're right.
If they want to become
okay, so this is just more sucking up. Let's get to what we're wrong about, if we can.
It's historical development. It's not the original Orthodox practice, the kneeling Sunday for the Eucharist. Another thing that's dissipated in recent times has been requiring vigil and confession before communion the next day. Because I even know in OCA parishes, you'd speak to the old timers in OCA parish, like, yeah, into the 90s, we all had to go to Vespers and all had to confess in order if we're going to commune the next day. And so it's like, even in very recent memory, the more liberal jurisdictions, they were requiring that. And I've been to Moscow Patriarchate liturgies, and generally speaking, no one goes to vigil. You confess during the liturgy. And at least then they're requiring confession. I do know that exceptions are made, obviously, for the very elderly, where it's difficult enough for them to get to liturgy, let alone to go both at night when they can't drive and all this stuff. And so, again, these are general things I'm talking about. I'm not trying to get to every little detail and every little situation, and I'm not a bishop. CYOSF, consult your own spiritual father. So anyway, I purposely went through that list of stuff, and we saw some pushback between Father John and I. What I said, so people know I'm trying to. Be a good faith actor here of what the true Orthodox are correct about. Now, that being said, I am not true Orthodox, and I want to give the reasons why I'm not true Orthodox, and in a good sort of like historian sort of way, right? Rise fall the papacy and all that stuff. It's I got historical reasons, but let me get to the more shallow, simple reasons first, because I think for the average person, they're gonna.
I put it on pause and I explained that all of these reasons are garbage. The True Orthodox are not small, tiny splinter groups. Father Peter Hears is a conspiratorial person. He's all, divisive people tend to be wrong. Guess who else is also that? And St. Augustine appeals to Catholicity in terms of geography, as do I. The fact that they pretend we're not all over the world doesn't mean we're not all over the world.
I have to make a decision on this without having published books on the ecclesiology of the church. And here are some of my shallow reasons. Small, tiny splinter groups tend to be wrong. I mean,
yes,
right? Like if you're the genuine Orthodox Christians of Southern Colorado, something already sounds wrong there.
That's how it's always historically
We can see this picture of the Greek Orthodox old calendar schisms, and thankfully we see sometimes they go back into communion, and sometimes they split again. Generally speaking, that's a sign of a sickness. So that's, again, not thinking much harder about it. This just looks wrong. Another thing is conspiratorial people tend to be wrong. When everything's a conspiracy, right? There's no bottom to the rabbit hole. You just keep on digging.
You can't control
and you're a normie. How dare you think, something normal occurred? There's something wrong with you. The world's round. That's crazy. How do you saw the Twitter thread that proves that it's flat? That sort of stuff. Those people tend to be wrong. Now, I've never been to outer space. I've not, put under examination everything about the moon landing and everything.
Their entire argument appears to be they're small, crazy conspiracy theorists, even though none of that is true.
So I'm not going to say I know 100% all this normie stuff's right. I guess that's not the point. The point is just usually not everything is a conspiracy.
Yeah,
so if you have a group where it's based upon all these conspiracies and, and the truth is not in these documents or those documents are altered and blah, 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 generally speaking, they're wrong. Not always wrong.
This is
again, shallow reason. I'm not saying these are.
This is just name calling. Their entire argument is name calling.
Again, people say conspiracies about myself, which because I know it's in my
own
mind.
No one says conspiracies about you, Craig. You're not that important.
So I take that to heart. That being said, divisive people tend to be wrong as well. The people that fight over everything and there's just no love. It's just all about what's right and just causing arguments for no reason. They tend to be wrong. They're not wrong about everything. Even a broken
I will add this: the remnant reality is that's always how the church comes back. The idea that we're just going to say what happens is always the same. The people that fall off because of a heresy will eventually choose a name more appropriate to them while at the same time trying to maintain their claim to orthodoxy. This is true with the Monophysites. This is true with the Uniats who are Orthodox in communion with Rome. This is what they always do. And so, to us, it's historically, there. I guess the Arians were right then. Yeah, that's basically the arguments they appeal to. Okay, do listen probably. Yep, okay. Ad hominem attacks, fallacy after fallacy, the conspiracy about the theory about the earth being round. It's all so tiresome.
But again, they tend to be wrong. Now, here's one that people should think a little more about, which is the appeals of Catholicity in the ROCOR and the True Orthodox polemic. So when I say ROCOR, this would be before the Union. It would come up quite a bit that Catholicity is the orthodoxy, the faith, and that comes up by St. Vincent de Lérins. But Catholicity sometimes does regard geographic spread. So, for example, writing against the Donatists, St. Augustine says, well, you're not communing with the rest of the Eastern churches, so how could you be the true church? Right? So he's appealing to a geographic Catholicity. And so someone could just look at the Orthodox Church and go, all right, there's this world's canonical body of churches, and there's this divisive, very split bodies of true Orthodox churches.
They could,
the more cogent body looks more correct.
And that's marketing, because you guys split out as often as everyone else. That's why there's 3 different churches that supposedly are canonical in Ukraine. The whole thing's a sham. It's all marketing. We are united, except you're not. That's why Moscow is jumping into Alexandria's territory. That's why, the thing with Ukraine, Macedonia is canonical when they weren't for the past 50 years. Like, it's just it's all marketing. It's about who handles and deals with the true faith and who holds and protects the true faith. This is a joke.
Again, it's a little shallow, but it's not a precedent that is lacking in the patristics. So it's worth bringing up. Another thing that comes up, which again, for someone more critically minded like myself, is they seem to be very fast and loose with facts. Like they'll say things like there's 20 million true Orthodox on Earth, and that's at least 10 times more than what's in the census data. And even that's probably, census data overshoots it a little bit. Because in general, even census data overshoots how many real Eastern Orthodox
just let us, hold on.
World Orthodox.
Again, if you have a region, and so if you have a region, we can help. But I mean, otherwise, it just becomes where do I go, and no one knows what now. Well, first off, thank you for becoming a member. Really appreciate it. For now, I'd say for the present, since you don't know what to do yet, I would say next week do your Typica, according to traditional calendar, etc. There's videos on that. I'll try to make one soon. You would just do your Typica, do the readings. This Sunday, and hopefully by next week there will be people watch these live streams all the time. We have a lot of priests who watch who can help you find a church or a mission. We've got over 100 in the country alone, and that's in the US. If you're in Canada, there's a lot of churches too, and there's other missions, but you're probably not alone. I'll tell you that. Orthodox just a Substack speaker, and he has a YouTube. Yeah. Unity that's not based on truth isn't worth anything. Exactly. They're all in the WCC and will fall under the anathema because of it. They depend on the appearances, which is the devil's playground, diluted. This teal movement feels like it needs some time to convince people is all. Well, the time appears to be now. Strange seeing a world Orthodox appeal to Augustine from my view. Very true. Once this majority with correct doctrine, no ecumenism, it would be the Orthodox Church. That's how it works. Matthew 18:20, and let's see what.
Because in general, people will just identify because they're baptized in the church. I'm Orthodox, but they never attend church, and they're part of the number. And lastly, I already kind of touched on it. Amongst the shallow reasons, the million acronyms. Right? Anyone that can't just say I'm Orthodox, Catholic, I'm Eastern Orthodox, a historical name that exists.
We do say that. This is infuriating. You guys are the ones that like to add on these acronyms and force us to have to defend ourselves on this, when in fact we refer to ourselves just as Orthodox, but you want to make sure that we understand that we're not. I really hate to say this, but I'm like on the verge of cursing someone out.
Listed in the first millennium, but it has to add a bunch of things to it, and so you got a very long alphabet soup sort of name. Tends to be wrong. Again, not always, but tends to be wrong amongst my shallow reasons.
That reminds me of Frankie Schaeffer, of course, went insane, but back when he was still sane and Orthodox, he came out with
Orthodox left him crazy
novel entitled Portofino, and it was really sort of a thinly veiled novel based on his own life growing up in Switzerland with his father, who was Francis Schaeffer, who was a Presbyterian missionary. Mm-hmm. And one of the funny things in the book is that as the novel progresses, the father of the family winds up switching into another Presbyterian church, but every time there's a new C that's added to the acronyms. They start off as like the PCA, and then it's the PCCA, and then it's the PCCCA. So it just gets more ridiculous as it goes on. Well, that's kind of, the old calendar groups are kind of that way. When you start having to get into, we're in ROCOR A 0.2 or something like
Well, maybe if you hadn't joined the Moscow Patriarchate, we wouldn't have this problem.
that, or ROSI 0.510 or something. It starts getting into an area of ridiculous division, and I think it's reasonable to ask why. If you people are all on the same page, like Father Joseph tries to portray when he's doing his shows, and he's got a Matthewite on there, and he's on there being from the Milan Synod or connected to the Milan Synod.
And for some reason, I can get along with the Matthewites, and for some reason, I can get along with people in the Clinical Synod, because I know that they are Orthodox, really Orthodox, and not committed to Ecumenism, Sergianism, and whatever heresies the WCC puts on your plate there, Father.
And then he's got somebody from the more mainstream Greeks on there, and they all agree to attack us and then to attack the other mainstream Orthodox. But the Matthewites don't think those other people have grace. I mean, that's just the fact. Father Joseph would not.
How does the Moscow Patriarchate feel about the churches in Alexandria?
Not be communed at a Matthewite parish unless something dramatically has changed since the last time I checked. He certainly wouldn't be allowed to serve. His jurisdiction is seen as being
You don't know anything about my jurisdiction, Father John. Stop speaking about it.
Canonical by most of the Greek Old Calendarists. And when I was a layman in Houston at the St. Vladimir Parish, and then later on a deacon, the priest who was over that parish most of that time was Father George Lardus, who was a Greek American, a liturgical and linguistic genius, and a rocket scientist on top of that. I mean, this guy really, he's still living, and he's an incredibly intelligent man.
He was involved when the Hockney schism first took place and had a very specific stance.
Well, he's a graduate from Jordanville, and he wrote his thesis in longhand, but he wrote it on the history of the Greek Old Calendarist, and it was the first history that had been written in English, and he had access to the Synod files. And unfortunately, because it was handwritten and it was never published, I've not been able to read it. I've only been able to hear him talk about it. But I remember him saying years ago when he was talking about their history is what you find is that none of these old calendars are telling the truth. They all have aspects of their story that don't add up. And
we're lying. This is where we're going. They're all lying.
They basically just lie about it. And I've read several Greek Old Calendar histories from the perspective of one faction or the other. And that's exactly what you find is that there's always something there that doesn't really make sense. For example, the Kyprianos Synod, they were all, their bishops were consecrated at a certain point, and their history says with a tacit approval of Archbishop Auxentius. Well, on what planet does the Orthodox Church give tacit approval for the consecration of bishops? That's not a thing.
If you're a first hierarch of a synod and you give tacit approval, I'm not even going to get into it. The fact that you called us liars 3 times tells me that this is not a good faith discussion.
So that's something that doesn't make sense. But then, the other histories also have things that don't make sense too. And that's the reason why, like I said, ROCOR entered into communion twice with different old calendar groups, and it didn't last because this kind of stuff. And as a matter of fact, when we went into communion with the Kyprianos Synod, I remember a woman by the name of Nina Secco, who was originally in ROCOR. She was connected with the Panalamonites. She went into schism with them. I think she later became a nun, and she's now reposed, if I'm not mistaken. But I remember her emailing me privately about this, and she said, you're going to find getting involved with the Greeks is bad news. And she was saying that as someone who was in a Greek Old Calendar group. She was basically saying, you're going to regret this. And I wouldn't have thought at the time that
To the Chicken says Central Florida. There are True Orthodox churches in Clearwater, in Lakeland, and I believe there's one in also southwestern Florida. I want to say Lutz, and that's a mission. That's a lay mission of there's a few. So you just have to look. Why this play happened for maybe because the Church of Greece tried to correct. Yeah, unfortunately, they tried to kill us, and they tried to put us in prisons, and they tried to jail our leaders. So I hope that helps everyone. This is getting hard to watch, if only because they're, I consider these people colleagues. I never thought that they would resort to just lying. And I saw that when we had our last thing together. But watching this now it's pretty upsetting. At least for me personally. Maybe I need to take myself. I don't know.
I would later say, you know what, Nina, you were right, but it didn't pan out the way we thought it was going to pan out at the time. And so my experience with this whole thing has been that I think ROCOR made a lot of mistakes in its dealings with the Greek Old Council.
We'll unpack that history real soon, but because I got to interrupt with this. Craig, your eyes are beautiful. I keep telling my wife that.
That's how you deceptively suck people into your evil machinations.
I get lost in the ocean of my blue eyes.
That's right.
So amongst the reasons why I'm not True Orthodox is that they started it, right? Who started the schism? They started it. And it's just a shallow criteria. And it's a criteria from St. Cyprian, and I find historically it's the most...
It's still true. You did start it. Okay, Byzantine Catacomb says, I really don't know whether to be True Orthodox or not. Well, you just being Orthodox. Being Orthodox means rejecting heresy. And that would probably mean going to a True Orthodox church. When I heard people say Father Sarah from Rose said World Orthodox had grace, not exactly. They lied and had to redo his actual books. This girl Anne said St. John's views are not the views of True Orthodox today, was in communion with the EP and thought St. Nikolai was a saint. That's because the EP hadn't yet done what happened with, they hadn't yet done the whole lifting of the anathemas. St. John reposed before that. So your friend Anne is wrong. Thank you, sir. No problem. Father Servant says World Orthodox would have to eventually leave. If the apostasy continued, it has. Yep. People would have to leave. Yeah, absolutely. World Orthodox have all multiple different versions of their own recent history in the past several decades, for example. That's, yep, because of marketing. It's certainly the Sergianism writing of history is full of extreme falsehoods. Yeah, we know. It is absolutely. This is desperation movie. It is. This is a desperation move. Do True Orthodox believe flat Earth? Do World Orthodox believe flat Earth? There's not, the shape of the Earth has nothing to do with the faith. For the record, I believe in round Earth. I realize that some people don't believe in flat Earth. I respect that. Guess what? Orthodoxy doesn't have to do with the shape of the Earth. So just stop. Somebody has just released a book with St. Cyril from Rhodes. He did, and I recommend it. Yeah, I was totally scandalized when I found out how the OCA started. I imagine it's pretty scandalous. Bible First True Orthodox. Why do we never see them bring up the rudder? Because it condemns them, and it's literally the law book of Orthodoxy. Genesis Creation, Early Man by Father Seraphim supports around Earth. I saw True Orthodox account saying the Earth is flatter. Ask the people who are leaders in the church. Ask the bishops. Ask the priest. Okay, the OCA is the MP's child. It absolutely is. Okay, that's Old Calendar Zealot, and he's a name worshiper, not True Orthodox. That's true. Name worshippers are not True Orthodox. Let's continue down this painful path.
Repeatable, easy to identify criteria for a side that's wrong. The Novatians started it. The Donatists started it. The Roman Catholics started it. It's, the Miaphysites, they started it. It's very easy to point, all these people that started it and went against the consensus of the church. So I don't find it to be a shallow criteria. They're a very simple criteria. And so when we unpack the history, you'll realize even with a very charitable view of, let's say, a GOCK and the more legitimate groups, it's going to be, they still part of something they started per se. And that is something where
they started.
Oh, no, they started because the other side was wrong and they're mean. The other side was wrong. We covered that. And they were mean. You didn't get to cover a lot of persecutions, but yes, that existed. But actually breaking communion is something you identify repeatedly in history, the wrong side. And so it's a simple criteria, but not a shallow one, I think. But anyway, just as a matter of reflection, shallow reasons are enough initially, I think, for the average person. I don't expect people to go watch 3-hour streams like this one, because this one's not at 3 hours, but Father, I think we're getting there. We'll be there an hour and a half. But all these things are decent reasons where a normal human being, again, not historians, going to come to the conclusion that, True Orthodoxy is not for me. Now, let me give you the meat of my personal reasons. We already covered it. They started it, right? And these are my more profound reasons. And the others I find are ecclesiastical issues, that the True Orthodox is canonically irregular in its largest group, which is the Greek group. And I don't mean canonically irregular in a negative way. I'm going to unpack that, all right? I'm going to give a short history.
shoot. Sorry, guys. Let's try this again. I'm terrible at this, especially with 3 different things going on. Okay, so the question was, please take a minute to explain what the rudder is. With my friend is watching with me, and it'll help him. Yeah. Okay. So the rudder is basically the canonical law of the church that has been collected through the various ecumenical councils, as well as councils that were received ecumenically and compiled by St. Nicodemus of the Holy Mountain in the 17th century. Basically, the ecumenical patriarch at the time advised that everyone should have a right to read the rudder, all lay people, so that they can understand what the bishops use to apply discipline in the church and how to maintain canonical order. Modern world orthodoxy today is actually afraid of the rudder. I've heard horror stories of people being chased out of parishes for daring to cite the rudder, daring to read the rudder. This is in the U.S. And many people who have become True Orthodox became True Orthodox because they read the rudder and they asked their priest a question and they were shunned. They were, disfellowshipped, whatever you want to call it. All for doing something that was approved by the church for hundreds of years. Let's see here. Orthodox Christendom was exiled multiple times and promised to fixing, which never came, and all this caused the first split, etc. Yeah, they're leaving a lot of stuff. A lot. Muted. You're muted. I'm muted. I'm muted. I'm muted. No sound. Muted. Strange that he calls us canonically irregular while glossing over. Yep, that's true. But you got to get your own house in order, old calendar zealot, and stop with the name worshiping. Thank you. No problem. Romanians, not Greeks, are the largest group of True Orthodox. It's possible. Keep in mind that the True Orthodox in both Greece and Romania are in the millions. So I haven't measured. I'm not sure. Those are 2 of the largest churches in the world, True Orthodox churches in the world, but I don't know. Well, let's see what this guy says.
From True Orthodox sources, only once, I think before the end of this, I'll let you know when I cite something that came from another source. This came from True Orthodox sources.
Mm-hmm.
One includes Deacon Nectario, something he wrote. The other being a video about his name's escaping, but we'll cover him in a second. But again, I'm not saying I'm a scholar of True Orthodoxy. Not my point. My point is,
you're definitely not.
I, as a normal human being, not totally invested in this, looked into True Orthodox sources and came up with this history. And I'm going to tell you what I found. All right. So persecutions devastated the Greek calendars. All right. And the remaining bishops they had didn't replace themselves. All right. So like they didn't ordain new bishops to replace themselves. And so Metropolitan.
Actually, the Matthewites did. That's what led to the Florentine Matthewite split. But okay.
And perhaps Saint, we'll see, over decades or maybe a century from now, Christomos of Florina works on trying to convince the patriarchs of the calendar.
He was lied to and convinced by people in the state church who he had long-standing friendships with that they would switch back to the traditional Orthodox calendar. They lied to him and manipulated him, and when he finally realized that they did, they arrested him. Meanwhile, Bishop Matthew, who was concerned for the people of the church and acted alone on consecrating a hierarchy, many of the Florinites did not trust that and felt it was uncanonical, so they asked for their own bishops. But this is implying that Chrysostomos of Florina died trying to convince the patriarchs to the return to the traditional calendar. This is not a realistic picture of St. Chrysostomos' life. So
now this is already interesting because we're told that the World Orthodox Graceless are not the real church, but the origin of their church.
Nothing makes me happier than to pause this so I can say thank you for the donation, $9.99. Really appreciate it. We do really appreciate these donations to keep the lights on. Thank you so much for that. So much better than listening to this. But anyway, I'm going back and forth on both videos. Visiting Catacomb. Is that you, Lazar? Just tell us the truth.
Is with a bishop they consider a saint that dealt with the World Orthodox as legitimate churches. And so this gets ignored a lot, but it's a pretty obvious detail, I find. And, and I'll have an apology. There might be nuances I'm missing here, but this seems to me this pretty obvious detail. Now, Chrysostomos, he died in 1955, and now the True Orthodox Greeks are bishopless. And according to a World Orthodox source, the idea was supposedly that the Greek True Orthodox Synod was like a synod in resistance. They weren't looking to self-replace. They were looking to influence the main Greek Synod and hopefully bring them back ultimately onto the old calendar.
That's made up. That's an argument that the synod in resistance used. There's no real evidence of this.
I personally think, from my own reading of history, that a lot of this is regional. When you follow some of these figures, whether it's Chrysostomos and others, there'd be parts of Greece which were known that those villages are true Orthodox or Old Calendar, and there'd be other villages that are New Calendar. And so a lot of these clergy were just representing where they came from, or their flock in a certain given locality. And so they weren't seeing this as this larger, grander thing that they were going to change the whole Orthodox world. They were more concerned about
Right, and they were also being persecuted by the state police, by the New Calendar hierarchy, and were trying to be picked off. So the fact that they didn't identify themselves as this great unified body might be due to the fact that they were being persecuted.
serving their people where they were. Okay, and again, especially amongst the people converting to Orthodoxy, it's hard for us to understand that because Orthodoxy isn't in our actual like familial roots, while this wouldn't be true in Orthodox countries. So anyway, whatever the truth of that may be, the true Orthodox don't have a bishop, and so what do? The Metropolitan, which is now the OCA, and ROCOR petitions to ordain
What the heck does the Metropolia have to do with the True Orthodox Church of Greece?
a True Orthodox Greek bishop for the USA. Well, what are the ramifications of this? Well, obviously, they're not considered graceless if the Metropolitan was approached first, right? The OCA essentially was approached to make a bishop for the Greek calendars. Well,
Where's this? This is like a made-up history. No, it wasn't at you, Nectarios. It was at Byzantine Catechumen. I tend to think that's Lazar. Maybe it's not. What's your name, Byzantine Catechumen? Let's find out. Single and consecration have been done before in difficult times. Wasn't a new thing that everything happens in context. Absolutely. NFTU.net, you can look up single-handed consecrations. Bishop Enoch actually wrote a history on that. Yeah, it was not you. Okay, and thank you again for that donation. So wonderful. Okay. And so Byzantine Catechumen, one day we'd like to find out who you are. Your name is Travis. Okay, Travis. You're asking kind of funky questions. So I'm going to leave the chat to answer you. He's referring to the Greek calendar communities in U.S. and Norcom under Petros going under the Metropolia. I see. That has nothing to do with what was happening in Greece, though. So it seems like he's conflating these things.
Well, again, if the world Orthodox are graceless, they don't have true holy orders, all these things.
Plus, on top of that, the Russian Metropolia was not by itself, was not part of World Orthodoxy. It was considered canonically isolated like ROCOR at the time. That's the period before 1970 when the Patriarchate gave them autocephaly.
And how can you come to them for an episcopacy? Maybe there's some subtle detail here I'm missing?
Yes, the subtle detail you're missing is there wasn't a concept of World Orthodoxy in the 1950s. There were different warring bodies, unlike the, what's the word we're looking for, the brand-named canonical Orthodox that you guys pretend to believe in now. That didn't exist. That's what you're missing. Your branding was missing.
It just, to me, looking at the history, again, from true Orthodox sources, doesn't make sense to me. Just being honest. All right. Now, they were, of course, particularly the Metropolitan were in communion with what are called the canonical, became the canonical churches of North America.
Yeah, that's true. The 1935 statements by the three bishops in Greece actually called for all the local churches to help them against the new calendars. They made no statements at the time against anyone except those attacking them and using the new calendar. Absolutely correct. We were Orthodoxy. We will remain Orthodoxy. And as the ecumenists fall, we will still be Orthodoxy.
They were in communion with the World Orthodox churches. So what happened next? Two ROCOR bishops secretly consecrated a bishop in 1960. The ROCOR Synod officially rejects this, right? They don't approve of it. They feel they're concerned about trying to get international recognition from countries like synods like Serbia and whatnot. Well, they don't want to stir the pot and get involved in this, get involved in some Greek matter. They were more concerned about Russia and Russians. Mm-hmm. But that being said, ostensibly, this rejection was sort of, I don't know, disingenuous might be an uncharitable way to put it, but I'll just use the word. Think of me in the most positive way possible using that word, right? Because ostensibly, they did this not to offend the World Orthodox Greek Church, which they considered valid.
Well,
right?
I think that
particularly they approved of it. And
looking at Subdeacon Nectarius's book on the connection of the Russian Church abroad and the old calendar is, what he says is that they were trying to.
I find it really funny that Father John, who actually was in communion with the Synod and Resistance, had to refer to Subdeacon Nectarius's book. Like, did you not have any information about this before that? I mean, I'm sure that Subdeacon Nectarius appreciates the purpose, but considering that he's been writing for a year and you were involved in this in the 1990s, I wonder if maybe you didn't have your facts straight then, so you're trying to spin now, Father? Just
Accommodate the opinions of Metropolitan Anastasi, who was always opposed to this. And he does say that St. John approved of it. I've not seen quotes that would say that he actually said, "Hey, yeah, this was great." And I think that
Here's what I saw: the year that they ordained the bishop that was in Queens. What was his name? His name will come up.
Petros.
Petros of
Yes,
Astoria.
Petros.
Yeah.
That St. John did write him a letter.
And he was stayed in communion with the ROCOR synod. That we've seen lots of that.
And him and several other ROCOR clergy took a picture right next to the church there. And so the idea is they concelebrated. Whether that really occurred, I don't know.
Wow. So he's saying, "Oh, look, they took a squirrely picture together, and they may or may not have concelebrated, but we don't know." Bishop Enoch correctly states minutes of the ROCOR decision are there. This is gross.
Oh, but the letter.
Yeah, I don't know whether they can celebrate it or not, but the letter, I think, is a letter thanking him for his hospitality. I think that Seraphim's letters indicate that St. John had, favorable opinion of Metropolitan Petros. But when the synod said
that working against him, though, if he's showing up to his church and accepting hospitality and
well, I mean, the thing is, but St. John, when he was in Shanghai, he was invited to attend the consecration of an Anglican bishop, and there's newspaper accounts that says.
I feel like he's going to try to throw St. John under the bus at this point. It's kind of, what kind of ROCOR is this?
That he was there and he was wearing a mantilla, which is another, when people say ROCOR is liberal now, that's something that would never happen today. And but I think St. John was being polite.
Maybe next he's going to talk about the consecration of Metropolitan Vitaly. I mean, like, what is he? He's looking for the dirt on the ROCOR? Aren't you a priest of the ROCOR?
Probably had good relations with the Anglicans in Shanghai, and he was invited to come, and so he did.
He allegedly also attended all the Orthodox churches in San Francisco on, I forget, during, I think,
On Holy Saturday, he would go from parish to parish, and he would venerate the Holy Table. Archbishop Peter told, he wouldn't tell.
This was, again, before the 1965, rescinding of the anathemas. I mean, this is getting kind of old. It seems like their argument seems to be like St. John did this before bad things happen, but that proves that bad people are okay, and that's not how history works.
Tell me that personally. He told a whole group of people that several times, and he didn't make a distinction between Greeks or even OCA. At that time, it would have been Metropolia, and there might even have been a Moscow Patriarchate parish in San Francisco at that time. I know there is now, but I don't know about back then.
You don't know if there was one. Maybe there was. Maybe there wasn't. You don't know if St. John went in there, but we're going to make the insinuation.
Be that as it may, just like I have all the documents for. I'll just accept that he's one of the people accepted it, but did not. Again, none of this was official. I think until 1969.
Well, let me just differ with you slightly on this. St. John was trained as a lawyer, and he was an expert in canon law.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when the synod said these consecrations are invalid, I can't imagine St. John saying, "Well, we're just saying that, but we don't mean it." Whether he thought that they should have been invalid or not, the synod said that they were invalid. And I think that if you asked him, "Are these consecrations valid or invalid?" I think he would have said they're invalid, because
even though he believed they were valid. The worst part is that he starts out with St. John was trained as a lawyer. With all due respect to Father John, he sounds like he was also trained as a lawyer, except he's trying to besmirch the memory of St. John.
What the synod decided.
All right, point taken. So to continue. These secret consecrations continued without synodical approval and continued in Greece. So they started in America, interestingly, in Detroit, and then it was in New York City, and then they started happening in Greece. And so calling this canonically irregular is actually quite charitable because it did not have synodical approval. And then make clear, just like it's the tacit approval of a patriarch or an archbishop or whoever, that's not how it works. When it comes to these consecrations, they need the approval of the whole synod. It's a matter of consensus. Again, painstakingly proved out in Rise and Fall of the Papacy. This is a very important ecclesiological understanding. So these are canonically irregular, no doubt about it. Their episcopal origins canonically irregular.
Okay, you can keep saying it, Craig, but that doesn't make it true. Byzantine Catacomb, and I'm going to say this exactly once. You said, "Will I be in hell if I don't go to True Orthodox? My priest is part of." I have no idea what your priest is part of. You've already stated you're 15 years old. I do not publicly try to help out kids. Talk to your parents. Research on your own. But I got nothing to do with it. Back. Their chat is too much. I'm scared to even ask.
There are historical precedents for people on the right side of something to have canonical irregularities. For example, the Diophysite Syrians during the Henoticon. They walled themselves up from communion to everyone other than the Pope of Rome, and that's despite them not being anywhere remotely close to his jurisdiction. But that's an example, for the sake of orthodoxy, of people doing something canonically irregular. Another example are the Diothylites during the 7th century. St. Martin tried having a program with John of Philadelphia and Stephen of Dora to ordain new bishops in Antioch's and Jerusalem's jurisdictions. It didn't pan out. We might unpack that a little more a little later, but the point is, canonically irregular, there already were churches there. They just had monothelites. So it's not that these canonically irregular ecclesiastical activities have never occurred before and haven't occurred with groups on the right side of a given question, but are they canonically irregular? The answer is yes. And that's just the point I want to make.
So what he's trying to say here is we're going to use the term canonically irregular even for people who were on the right side of history. Well, I hate to break it to you, we can acknowledge canonical irregularities if you acknowledge that we're fighting for the truth. What you can't do is acknowledge that we're fighting for the truth because that condemns you.
So that being said, with the diathelite controversy, what doesn't get spoken about a lot is that the Sixth Synod fixes the diathelite, the monothelite controversy, and with the diathelites winning the day. And the Sixth Synod reconciles Constantinople Synod, which was monothelite, Antioch Synod, and deposes a patriarch, which was monothelite. All right, Rome is part of the Synod through their legates. Rome was in communion under Pope Vitalian with the monothelites. All right, and so if this graceless world Orthodox theology is correct, then
I will note that I did ban Byzantine catechumen. He started repeating his emotional arguments. I get how that works, and it's that's it. Emotional blackmail is a technique used very often, particularly by people who are dealing with some level of cognitive dissonance. But I'm not dealing with it in my chat. Let me see here. Yep. Okay. St. Philaret said that it was valid, but there was not, if I remember correctly, there was a need for correction. Yeah. I think he was gaming the chat. I'm not dealing with it.
Because people in communion with heretics existed in the 7th century, even amongst those with Orthodox opinions, this would undo the whole church. It's game over now, right?
This is the Cootie theory of the canons, and it doesn't work.
It doesn't work. That being said, I want to be honest with the sources, and there's somewhat of a lack of sources on this error. I want to be honest with sources where Antioch didn't get to elect a patriarch regularly for decades. So you could argue, well, their synod really never consented to this state of being because they didn't really have patriarchal elections, and their synods didn't get to have meetings. And I'll concede all those points. But did synods like Constantinople's reconcile, and they were monothelite? The answer is yes. Did synods like Rome enter communion with monothelites? The answer is yes, even though they maintained diathelite doctrine. And so,
but then when they did that, they were heretics. That's what you're skipping.
I just don't think you could draw the extreme conclusion of the Cootie's version of ecclesiology. And so we'll keep it going.
Well,
so,
you can call it the Cootie's version of ecclesiology. I just call it ecclesiology.
Amongst the Greek Old Calendarists were the Matthewite True Orthodox. Their synod already had bishops, I think since 1938, but they originated by non-canonical ordinations with one bishop doing the ordaining. So you need, if I remember the Apostolic Canon right, you need 3 bishops to do ordination. The point is you need more than
it says 2 or 3. I think that might be canon 1 of the apostles.
So you need a few, right? You need a few, not just one. So they submitted to ROCOR.
That's not actually true. He didn't do the consecrations in 1938. I'm pretty sure he did them closer to 1950. The implication being that as soon as he broke communion with them, he did not. He tried to reconcile with them as well. So that's not true. You're just making up history now.
And allowing them to reconsecrate their entire episcopacy, so that way at least could be canonical.
Yeah, 1947.
So again, the origin of the Matthewites was not canonical. The fact that it submit to their body being corrected by ROCOR.
Yeah.
At that point, at least the ROCOR synod was consenting to it. Now, ROCOR attempts to unite the feuding True Orthodox Greeks factions and forms,
but it was not 1938.
They just have this. The World Orthodox Greek Church had grace or not.
I will say this is the reason that it bothers me is because it's a fantasy argument. They want to argue that as soon as Bishop Matthew broke communion with Bishop Chrysostomos, both of whom many consider saints, as do I, that Bishop Matthew went off and ran off and just was like, it's time to make a synod, because in their fantasy world, that's how we live. It's disgusting.
To the sort of feuding, we already went into the past, how Chrysostomos of Florina, right, he was working with the patriarchs of his time. He understood that they were part of
the church. He wasn't working with them. They were lying to him.
Church, we understand that when the True Orthodox in America were having their episcopacy reestablished by ROCOR, that before they went to ROCOR, they went to the OCA. It was the Metropolitan. So
they didn't go to the OCA. They went to the Metropolia. The OCA was the creation of the MP with autocephaly, and that was in 1970.
We already know that there were people within the Greek Orthodox orbit that were old calendars that recognized the World Orthodox were canonical churches.
Greek Orthodox orbit. Pope Vitalian did receive the Emperor Constans, but did he enter into communion with the Monothelites, or is he referring to Honorius in the 630s? You'll never know. It's a made-up history, Vladika. 1948, and he did it because he was dying and afraid that the church would have more bishops. No more bishops. Absolutely. That's why I did it. We can understand it. But, of course, Craig is lying.
churches. That being said, both factions reconcile. So, right,
Yeah, they did.
But they take the Matthewite opinion, the view of ecclesiology, which is interesting. So they
Yeah, the
there's this
Matthewites
development
were
within
right.
Greek True Orthodoxy away from the original Greek True Orthodox view.
No, not the original Greek True Orthodox view. The original 1935 document said that the new calendars had no grace. They were taking the original position, and yes, the Matthewites were right.
Worth bringing up. Now, this like people like Metropolitan and perhaps Saint, we'll have to see again. We'll see decades or a century or so from now. Petros of Astoria, I believe he was the
This
lone
is
opposition to
pitiful.
this in Greek True Orthodoxy.
This is pitiful.
All right,
And for a
so
period of time, he was isolated. And he actually petitioned ROCOR to be accepted into our synod. And before he died, he actually was accepted into ROCOR.
So that is, and this is important because it shows where ROCOR stood during all this. So ROCOR advised Metropolitan Petros not to submit to the graceless confession that the Greek True Orthodox were reconciling over. And so they said that there must be a conciliar solution, ecumenical council that will solve the calendar issue and determine this question. And so that was the
This
actual.
was due to the interference of bishops like Anthony of Geneva. There was always a faction in ROCOR that wanted to be in communion with world orthodoxy, and didn't want to lose their officiality. The fact that we're holding that up as the ROCOR position is wrong. It's deceitful, and well, so much of this presentation has been.
Official synodical stance of ROCOR. And so oddly, this resulted in Metropolitan Petros being excommunicated by ROCOR, which really isn't fair, but this is what actually occurred. So he was excommunicated by ROCOR and also the Greek True Orthodox. And he was the one who didn't change. He was
Orthodox movement. Grandma says, I understand this is important, but if I'd run into this level of public discussion in 2014, I would have freaked out and maybe not pursued EOs at all. I wouldn't have been able to handle it. I think a lot of people feel horrified by the situation now. Maybe it was providential. Maybe this had to come out the way it did, because if it didn't, maybe a lot of people would have freaked out and stayed with Rome or something. Yep, spin doctors, they have agendas. Yeah.
He was keeping the same view that everyone always had. But again, ROCOR was concerned about the Russian church. They weren't trying to get involved in this local Greek issue. They're extricating themselves from it, and they didn't recognize the gracelessness of the world churches. Again, doesn't mean they endorsed the grace.
Well, and who were they supporting, Greg? Was it the Catacomnics? Was it helping them set up hierarchies in Russia, known as the Free Russian Orthodox Church? Something neither of you have discussed the entire time? Mm-hmm.
In the world's churches, synodically. That's not the point I'm making. My point is they didn't recognize the gracelessness, and that's why they said there has to be an ecumenical council to determine this question.
And this is actually an important point, because if you go back to 1995 and you ask the question, why did ROCOR go into communion with the Cypriano Synod and not with the Chrysostomus Chiusa Synod at the time, which was the bigger Greek Old Calendar Synod? Well, the reason is the Cypriano Synod did not condemn the other churches.
He leaves out the letter from Bishop Gregory Grabe, where he was complaining to the Synod that he did not understand why they chose to enter into communion with kind of this weird little synod, as he described the Synod in Resistance, as opposed to the Synod of Chrysostomus Chiusis, which was decent. But it was later revealed that the motivations of a number of the bishops was because by holding to this graceful position in world orthodoxy, it would put them in a place where they could begin negotiating with the Moscow Patriarchate, which was something that was unknown to many in the Synod at the time. This was actually the beginning of the end of what, we would call ROCOR United, because by 1998-99, 5 years later, there would be open overtures with Moscow Patriarchate. They would be attacking Metropolitan Vitaly. They would be attacking the Russian bishops that they themselves made. This is a horrible period, but one I lived through, so I actually remember it, and I feel like this is going to be a lot of what's the word I'm looking for? A lot of spin and untruth, but there is a truth to be discerned. Orthodox, I don't know. Okay. Yeah, the MP is Mother Church. What a joke. I'm sorry, that's gross.
Assumed that the other churches had grace. They would commune people who visited their monasteries that were parts of these other churches, but they felt like they could not celebrate with the clergy of those churches because of the problems that were going on. So clearly that was ROCOR's position consistently throughout this entire period, that ROCOR as a synod, not that there weren't bishops that maybe had different opinions. I don't even think Metropolitan Philaret thought that all the other local churches were without grace. He did think the Moscow Patriarchate was, And he
And he also thought the OCA was.
thought the same thing of the Evlogian group, which was the Paris Exarchate that had been part of ROCOR and then went under the Ecumenical Patriarchate. He considered them to be schismatics.
And the OCA.
Interestingly, St. John, when he was the bishop of
and the OCA, he considered the OCA a false church also. Yeah, I'm amazed they haven't made fun of the miracle of the cross, which would have been amazing since my family, we had someone present at that time. At this point, I don't know what they're going to throw under the bus. Who knows? Maybe that's next.
in Western Europe was communing these people. And so St. Metropolitan Philaret later complains about this. I don't understand the position of Leviticus John, although he was a holy man, but I don't know why he didn't dot the I's and cross the T's and explain to these people, the perilousness of their situation. So when they try to paint St. John as being some sort of an old calendarist that agrees with their position, that just
here he goes again. Even though St. John had a great deal of love for many of the old calendar churches, this is tiresome.
Just too much evidence that that's not the case. Was he sympathetic with at least some of the old calendars? I think he was, but he was not. He was not of their mindset. As a matter of fact,
that's sad.
I came across an old calendarist that wrote an article about St. John, and they obviously didn't think St. John was a saint because they were attacking him on a number of issues, including communing the Evlogians.
Did Leviticus John Shaw write that article?
No, this is an old calendarist.
Oh, and, no, it wasn't. I thought it was Leviticus John Shaw that was quoting that article from like Vladimir Moss or something.
This is tragic.
This is not Vladimir Moss either. I can't remember the name of the guy. I could pull it up if you really want to know.
It's okay. Keep going.
But basically, the other thing that he pointed out in this article was that when St. John was the bishop of Western Europe, when he brought in that French Orthodox church, and they had for a period of time, they actually consecrated a bishop for those people. He allowed them to be on the new calendar. So St. John oversaw basically a vicar bishop in a diocese of Western Rite, new calendars. And he was okay with that. And I think this article claims they were even on the Gregorian Paschalian, which I don't know for sure, but I'm assuming that he wouldn't have said that if he didn't believe it.
Though he wouldn't want that to be a permanent solution, though.
When did he say, okay, you're going to be transitioning to the old calendar? I think that he basically.
I'll leave that to Snack because he's translating a lot of stuff in French into English.
Yeah, but
so I don't know.
but like the other two new calendar synods that were in ROCOR at the time were Romanian and Bulgarian, and there was never any understanding that, hey, we're going to let you be on the new calendar, but when this date happens, that's when you're going to switch, because it was when ROCOR tried to force them on the old calendar, and I think it was either maybe during Metropolitan Philaret's time, but it might have been under Metropolitan Vitali. But at some point, the Synod basically gave them an ultimatum, either you switch or else, and they chose or else, and they wound up in the OCA.
I guess
this is tragic. I'm going to see if there's any more. We'll see.
Exactly. Yeah.
I'm so tired of listening to them. I've got to put that.
Ready yet? You're not.
David and
you're not a soldier for Christ that can deal with the spiritual battle, because that's
drink of water in this
I think
desert
one of
of
the
lies.
differences, and you hear this rhetoric. I don't want to say, it's true for every Protestant or every Catholic or something, but generally speaking, because of the rhetoric of those denominations, is about appealing to happiness and justice and social issues.
All right, guys, I don't know where you're going with
we
this.
in the Orthodox.
I'm just gonna have to go back to this.
So that being said, there's I think anyone watching, and again, this history is from True Orthodox sources. Again, consider the person.
Partially,
I'm not True Orthodox. I could be reading things wrong.
You are.
Here's what I think it looks like. It's a mess, right? Like, ROCOR telling Metropolitan Petros, don't do this. You're excommunicated anyway. It's a mess. But it's a mess of good intentions, right? They're trying to do the right thing and work through these political squabbles. And again, the Russian church is worried about the Russian people. The Greek True Old Calendars are worried about the Greek people. And Americans tend to think of, well, why aren't they thinking of these international, interjurisdictional solutions? And that's not how they were thinking. That would be imposing a way of thinking very alien to what the True Orthodox movement was operating like during.
No. You have to understand, even your World Orthodox weren't thinking like that, because it was the period before globalism. It was the period before the internet. It was the period before global communications. You are anachronistically applying the current state of the now when it comes to technology and the very good marketing job that your combined leaders have done over the past 50 years onto a situation where most people didn't own a television. When people wrote a letter, they literally wrote it. What you're talking about is you're applying modern history onto these people. You're doing it unfairly, and you're doing it lopsidedly.
Those early days. So anyway, ROCOR eventually re-enters in communion with Cyprianites because this view on grace, which gives a good idea that ROCOR kind of consistently always saw that the world Orthodox had grace. Metropolitan Petros maintains good relations with everyone. Again, that's why I say he'll maybe be a saint someday. And by the 90s, he's reconciled with all sides. I just want to point out that the political bureaucratic nature of True Orthodoxy during this era is very messy. So what I even say here is a very simplistic distillation of a lot more moving parts. All right. So that being said, I want to make another apology now, because that was the history. Now I'm going to start getting into more specific critiques. And we know this is a day and age where everyone wants to pretend they're their chest banging men, but then they cry when people have an opinion other than theirs, and they can't be adults and listen to it and disagree in a honorable sort of way. So I'm going to get critical here. All right, I'm going to get critical of True Orthodoxy, but in defense of ROCOR. All right, that's all I'm doing. I'm not interested in evangelizing True Orthodox. I don't think I have the blessing for this. I don't have the inclination for it. I'm not interested.
Look at the bright side, Patrick. Even if you did, you wouldn't be convincing.
The divisions between Orthodox. So I'm just giving the following critiques because I feel that they are ecclesiastically instructive. They're useful for what I do with apologetics when it comes to Roman Catholics and other things like that. And again, all these accusations against me demanded, where does Craig really stand on this stuff? Well, now you get to see. It's not because I'm trying to evangelize and poach your members, okay?
Don't
Now,
lie.
Actually,
you know what?
The True Orthodox
I will say this.
most
Hold on. I will say this. A lot of people, and this is something I didn't cover very carefully, but something I kept to myself until this debacle. One of the things that I did know about Craig beforehand is that for years before, there were people considering joining True Orthodoxy, and he was part of a group that was trying to circulate documents that were these documents of like the refutation of True Orthodoxy, where he was literally begging people to not become True Orthodox. So yeah, this idea that he's like, oh no, I'm not poaching anyone. You've been involved in the politics the whole time, man. I knew it. I tried to be polite about it. I was polite about it, but I always knew it.
of their time to evangelizing the world Orthodox. So if you can't calmly accept the fact that someone from the side you're evangelizing will defend themselves from it, I feel shows that you have very thin skin and it's very effeminate. So
this is a tricky thing. His baptismal name is not Patrick. His chrismation name is Patrick, which he got, I think, from the Antiochians when he was chrismated. However, I have tried out of decency over the years to repeatedly use his chrismational name, for lack of a better term. But he doesn't use it himself. Look at the screen. He doesn't care about it. Why should we? Why should we care about some Antiochian chrism that, for all I know, could be holy oil, because they've been throwing holy oil into their chrism since like the 1920s. So now it's just holy oil. It doesn't even smell like chrism. Why would I respect a person who doesn't respect his own chrismation? Yeah. I'm not trying to, I would never try to disrespect his saint, but he's doing it himself.
Man, and take their critique and disagree with facts and don't get all personal. All right.
Mm-hmm.
There needs to be a reclaiming of what it means to be masculine, because a lot of the stuff in apologetics and the macho debates, it's not. It's catfights. It's ridiculous.
Catfights.
So anyway, we're going to be going over the 2014 Joint True Orthodox Statement, otherwise known as the True Orthodox Church and the Heresy of Ecumenism, Dogmatic and Canonical Issues. This is the most official statement of modern day True Orthodox belief. It's signed on by the largest groups of Greek, Romanian, and Russian True Orthodoxy. The Bulgarian True Orthodox Church is tiny. It's only about 20 parishes. But Bishop Foti's 2013 official statement, right around.
Okay, let's understand something here. This is hilarious. First off, you're going off of a website that hasn't been updated in about 10 years. Second off, the size of Bulgaria as opposed to, say, the United States is not the same. And if you watch any of the Bulgarian churches' YouTube channels, their churches are gigantic. Like, there are only about 20 parishes. These are not parishes. These are giant cathedral type churches. So this isn't honest at all, but we'll continue.
Around this statement is very similar. And I know there was a period of time there in communion. There might be a communion today. So I do think by critiquing this statement, it kind of critiques the whole world version of the True Orthodox movement. Now, again, because True Orthodoxy has lots of other splinter groups, this won't have 100%, but this is probably a solid 90 or at least 80% of True Orthodoxy is covered by this. And so,
I would say about 70. But yeah, it's a lot. It's most True Orthodox.
I mean, critiquing this is the most legitimate thing I could critique of their doctrinal views. This document's still on the GOCK website, which is where I got it.
I know.
And so this is not some sort of like random thing that is, from a website that's from someone else. Like they were criticizing some non-official Moscow website that had articles. That's like, who put them there, from a heretic, from that Barker lady. And they're like, oh, this shows Moscow Patriarchate.
Oh, the Barker lady, you mean Metropolitan Jonah were, kind of following the teachings of Margaret Barker. You guys can do the research.
Believe the Theotokos and all these things. And it's like, that'd be drawing too much of a conclusion because we don't even know who uploaded this thing. It's not even an official website. This document is an official document on the official website, synodically accepted by these synods. So I can't be accused of that by critiquing this document. Now, my humble opinion, and I want to say this actually very humbly, is that the document contains transparent ecclesiastical errors.
Sure.
All right. And I could be reading this document wrong when I admit this, because I'm not in the true Orthodox wavelength. I'm not really emotionally and personally.
You could also be just wrong because you get things wrong a lot.
Invested in their issues. I'm reading this as an outsider, as someone who studies ecclesiology for the sake of apologetics, particularly against Roman Catholics. I'm really not very concerned about these intra-Orthodox.
Let's stop here. Great question. Is the concept of what is canonical understood differently between true Orthodox and world Orthodox? Yes, it is, because the traditional Orthodox understanding of canonicity is following the canons. The understanding of canonicity as understood by the marketing groups of the world Orthodox is in communion with our people.
Issues. It's really not the majority of my channel. But so that means that I could be wrong. I'm not part of the wavelength that made this thing. And we sometimes have to say this. We think we understand something because we read words. But if you're not part of the group that wrote it or not from the era it was written, you can misunderstand its actual point. So I just want to be humble and admit that. Now, that being said, 110, you'll see the citations of parts of this document. I'm going to read in italics what the document says. Then I'm going to give a critique. Father John, feel free to jump in.
I'm so sorry.
The statement states, every bishop who proclaims heresy publicly and barefacedly in church or is in syncretistic communion with those of other beliefs or religions becomes a false bishop and a false teacher, while those bishops who commune with him are destroyed together with him. And they quote St. Theodore the Studite on that point. So my response. St. Theodore the Studite implicitly recognized the validity of the Constantinopolitan holy orders and seeking to restore Constantinople to Pentarchic communion. All right, I have a citation on the screen.
For the record, Pentarchic communion is not a real term. They use that legally because of the fact that the Pentarchy was a concept in Roman law, not as an Orthodox ecclesiological position.
But we know that he was part of a program that was trying to get the Constantinopolitan Synod to repent. So he obviously didn't think because there's heresy in that Synod, that whole Synod became void of grace. Otherwise, this whole way of trying to reconcile Synod would not work. Now, we also have this, I think, very point-blank quote from St. Theodore, where he says, "We are certain that God has not abandoned the church of our country." Right? So it seems to be a pretty plain statement that he doesn't ascribe to the Cootie's view of ecclesiology, which he's being quoted as supporting.
Well, and another thing that needs to be understood is the First and Second Synod, which is where we have that 15th canon that the old calendarists like to quote, was held in the wake of the synod, the schism that happened under St. Theodore, where he went into schism with a patriarch who's also a saint, whose name escapes me at the moment, but it was over the Moekian schism is what it was called, because that means...
Great question. If what constitutes as canonicity is being in communion for the world Orthodox, isn't that similar to the position of the Papists? No, it's identical to the position as the Papists.
Adultery in Greek, and the patriarch had allowed an emperor to get married for the 4th time, and St. Theodore thought that was wrong, and he broke communion. Well, that is the reason why I think it's Canon 13 or 14 says that you can't break communion with a bishop who's merely in violation of the canons. And so clearly that synod was saying, this was not the way to go. Now, St. Theodore is still a saint, and he's a great theologian, defender of icons and all that. But the fact that he said something doesn't mean that that's canon law, because there are actual canons that were written in response to what he did that really didn't quite go along with what he had actually done.
I think one thing people miss, whether St. Theodore and other people, is the polemical. Sometimes a saint will take a polemical extreme take on something, right? He's going a little beyond his actual position, or at least his practical position, right? Because we see St. Theodore trying to reconcile the entire Synod of Constantinople. And so to take certain statements of that saint against their actual actions, I think is, again, believe facts rather than words, like the back of my book says, right? The St. Gregory the Great. We have to be aware of the certain polemical overstatements that do exist and not take them literally and then ignore the actual practical applications of those words that those same saints did. Now, that being said, remember, 110 was talking about bishops like in communion with not only just heretics, but people of other religions, which is clearly abominable, and some of the weird stuff happening in the World Council of Churches back in the 70s and stuff. So yes, that stuff's wrong and condemnable. Now, anyhow, the church historically used conciliar solutions to restore entire synods. So this is something we don't see in True Orthodoxy. True Orthodoxy tends to create splinter synods on the alleged correctitude of a doctrine. And there's no precedent for that in the early church. It looks more like 20th and 21st century Anglicanism. Every time one group of some Anglican body gets way too crazy, they split off and create some other new Anglican group. But generally speaking, Orthodoxy, we find synods, if we read church history, synods go into heresy, and then entire synods get reconciled. Yes, there's individual bishops.
We've also seen entire synods fall, and then entire synods get replaced. But he's leaving that out.
We see, and so what St. Theodore the Studite was actually following was this synodical reconciliation model, because that's the only model that really we find in early church history. Now,
I don't believe that. I think that, frankly, that, no offense, that argument is, I made it up. Frank, that's not the original model. That's not even how the church saw itself. That's just that's just a marketing, man. This isn't, you clearly don't understand what Saint Theodore the Studite was doing. You don't understand how the early church history works. You don't understand the confusion. What you do understand is your anachronisms and trying to fit it into a new model, just like the Roman Catholics did. The Anglican comparison is interesting. Craig's argument would be that if the Fanar or the MP or the Antiochians did women's ordination and gay marriages, you have to stay with them. Otherwise, you're in schism. Yeah, unfortunately.
Being that that's the case, something like a sit-in resistance makes sense. Syrian diaphysite, such, right? And in the 6th century, perhaps Metropolitan Christomos of Florina, if my interpretation of events between the 30s and 50s are correct, that, right, they weren't looking to replace the Greek World Orthodox Church. They were looking to influence the Greek World.
Well, they were looking they weren't looking to influence the Greek Orthodox Church. They were looking to preserve the Greek Orthodox Church because the canonical legal body under the government was killing true Orthodox people and putting them in jail. Yeah, the Patriarch's a heretic, you're a schismatic if you don't commemorate him. This is all I don't know, for those who have been following this for a couple of months now, how suddenly we've gotten so popular and interesting to them. Do you start noticing they were really, really repetitive with their false statements?
The Orthodox Church. And so by being in resistance, they're hoping to change things for the better and to preserve the correct doctrine for those they were shepherds over. Hence why
one point about the early history of the Greek Old Calendarists that I think is important to understand is that actually, before Bishop Matthew broke off from the rest of the Old Calendarists and then went his own way, the Church of Greece was actually preparing to switch back to the Old Calendar.
No, that's what they told Metropolitan Chrysostomos, and they were lying. And in fact, Bishop Matthew did not just go his own way. The church was split. The Church of the True Orthodox was split apart. The bishops were often put in jail, including St. Matthew. And he realized that the new calendarists were lying to Metropolitan Chrysostomos and didn't take him seriously at that point, and tried to work out organizing parishes in the midst of the most severe persecution in the history of the Greek Church.
Calendar, because basically what these bishops did affect enough pressure on the synod to where they were in the process of giving in.
So it was working.
But then when Bishop Matthew went his own way and declared everybody else.
This is a complete lie. There was never any real movement in the new calendarist hierarchy to move back to the old calendar.
To be without grace, that basically gave them the cover to say all these people are a bunch of kooks, and they wound up staying on the
Blame the victim.
New calendar. So if the
I
old
don't know,
calendar is actually
I don't need details about that, but I'll say this ignorant opinion that I just heard from you.
Well, that was a made-up story, but let's hear the ignorant opinion on the made-up story.
Which is, if true, and I have no reason to doubt you, Father, how could that not be the work of the devil? Because
I think it is the work of the devil. I mean, it's the work of the devil. You know,
so now what St. Matthew did was the work of the devil because he alone honestly tried to protect the tradition of the church. St. Chrysostomos, unfortunately, was misled by the lies of the new calendarists. Only people who are doing the work of the devil would accuse innocent saints under persecution of doing the work of the devil. You're starting to sound like the Sergianists you're pretending you're not.
Ignatius of Antioch, a disciple of the Apostle John, he says, no one who falls another into schism will inherit the kingdom of God. So I think we should be concerned about heresies, modernism, people who violate the canons, but we should be concerned about schisms too, because not inheriting the kingdom of God is a pretty bad thing. So going into schism when you don't have a valid justification for doing it is also not a good thing.
Absolutely. So back to the True Orthodox statement, it continues at the core of Ecumenism. So it's giving its definition of Ecumenism, why it condemns it. Our so-called baptismal theology, dogmatic syncretism, the abolition of the boundaries of the church, the recognition of ecumenical brotherhood, the theory of sister churches, a denial of the ecclesiological and soteriological exclusivity of the Orthodox Church, even to the synodal recognition of heterodox communities.
Bishop Enoch makes a valid point here. He says, people should also be realistic. Even if 90% of the true Orthodox just straight up joined World Orthodoxy, it would have actually zero effect on World Orthodox policy on ecumenism and modernism. Rather, it would be taken as a victory for World Orthodoxy. So the idea that if you guys had stayed, it would have been better is not actually true. Yeah, absolutely. What's it called? Old calendar says that. So the idea that if you guys stayed would have been better is actually not actually true. Yeah. I mean, I hate to say this, but that's the truth. The only reason they feel threatened by us now is because people have noticed that we're there. But for decades, they worked very hard for people to make sure they never saw us. That's not our fault, but they're. I will not. I'm not gonna. Any of you. Okay, I'm starting to think that. Okay, if you say flat Earth, I'm now warning everyone in the chat. If you say flat or globe Earth in this chat, you will be banned because I will know who you are. Heck, we get enough. Okay, requirements to fall under the road anathema. Yep, John Wrinkle. It looks like the Feast of Pentecost, the Union of Roman EP will be formally announced, and the rest of World Orthodoxy will come in line. I don't think they're going to do that. They're going with the strategy that works. Right now, they commemorate the Pope, so they're already informally in communion. They're convincing people that they're all one church through their own catechetical resources on both sides. Why would they need to? If they did a formal union, that would cause a bunch of people to leave. So why would they? They're looking for maximum returns. Unseen Warfare says it's not we who go into schism by submitting to Metropolitan Sergius, but rather you who are obedient go with them into the abyss of the church's condemnation. St. Joseph of Petrograd. Big Zosa says, is it true that St. Basil says schismatics still hold the same faith, whereas heretics do not? Yeah, that's correct. Schismatics is the concept of schism assumes that we hold the same faith. And they assume that we're schismatics when it's clear we don't hold the same faith because we don't do ecumenism or that stuff.
All right. Now, that's the definition of ecumenism. I agree. That definition is bad. I don't endorse that ecumenism. But you're a ROCOR, Father. Does ROCOR endorse any of that?
No.
No.
And I don't think
Incorrect. There's actually ROCOR MP clergy who are now engaging in ecumenical actions. He's lying.
the Russian Church does either.
That's a lie also. The Russian Church takes pictures with the Pope, and there's the Havana Declaration. There's lots of evidence of that. That's a lie.
I don't think anyone does. Nobody endorses that form of ecumenism.
Except for the leaders in the Moscow Patriarchate who are in the World Council of Churches. Yes, they do. You're lying. You may not. Too bad.
The Patriarchate comes as close as anybody does to endorsing it. And, if I was in the Greek...
Yeah, I think the EP, definitely the Patriarch does say things.
You mean the Ecumenical Patriarch, which we've been saying for 30 years. And once upon a time, Father John used to take seriously.
But that's why my point. Has any World Orthodox synod other than the EP officially or explicitly endorsed any of?
Yes, if you look at the documents of 2016, the 2016 Council of Crete.
That ecumenical theology.
Not that I'm aware.
I think the answer is no.
No, you'd be surprised. You should look at the Council of Crete.
We're the authority of these joint statements, and that's synodically approved. So yeah, you can find some people saying heretical things.
How about Crete, Greg? How about Crete, Father John?
Would that be like us finding, some heretical things from one or two true Orthodox people and say that represents everyone that's part of this true Orthodox?
The Crete Council, Craig. The Crete Council, Father John.
Statement. That would not be fair. You notice I'm not critiquing every random thing that I can find from random people. I'm critiquing a specific authoritative statement.
How about the Crete Council, Craig? How about the Crete Council, Father John? Let's see what we got here in terms of comments. Yeah, Evan was a troll. ROCOR in the WCC, that's correct, through connection with the Moscow Patriarchate, correct. MP lover. So this is the ecumenism as a made-up fake heresy argument. Yep, we've seen this before. This is back to standard old World Orthodox position. And ROCOR make fake anathema, very true. It's actually very simple. Have the MP publicly proclaim the anathema against ecumenism. For some odd reason, they absolutely don't want to do this. How strange. I was about to ask, if that was the case, why do they refer to the true Orthodox as schismatics? The reason is because if they admit that what we're saying is true, then they're heretics. And so the point is they have to call us schismatics and they have to dismiss their own ecumenism, because if they don't do that, they have to admit that they are the frauds that we've been saying that they are.
All right. And so this kind of disputation with ecumenism is, yeah, we agree with you, but it's not the basis for being separate from World Orthodox, because the World Orthodox don't ascribe to that ecumenism. All right. And that's my point here.
Yeah, but
I do agree, and I concur that tolerance for the ecumenical patriarch on this statement, on this basis, is too much. I don't know why. I know everyone doesn't want to stir the pot. Maybe that's why God's allowed the schism in Ukraine, and all this stuff's going to come to a head. But this sort of allowance for ridiculousness is no
maybe like a perennialist chiliasm, right? If you want to use fancy words. The one that
got rid of the anathemas against Roman Catholics and stuff like that?
It was Athenagoras.
Yeah. So
Meletius and his successor in Constantinople both went into communion with the living church, and they remained in communion with them until after World War II. And that was a schismatic and heretical group.
And so that's my point. So we do have a basis.
So your history is based on communion with schismatic and heretical groups by your own admission.
Amongst the true Orthodox history, that there's been tolerance for stuff like this.
Yeah.
I'm not endorsing that tolerance. I'm against it. Again, I'm just a layperson with no skin in the
Right.
game. So why wouldn't I want perfection? I want perfection, right?
I would like perfection too, but we just have to acknowledge that when we look at church history, we see messy situations like this.
Now I'm going to stop for a second because that was such a good statement from Bishop Enoch. The MP breaks communion over Ukraine. Perfectly fine. But to break communion over ecumenism, that's forbidden according to Craig. Very true.
Now, to continue my response, the True Orthodox excommunicated ROCOR, right? Despite them not being ecumenists. And the rationale is, right, ROCOR invalidated itself because they entered a communion with the Moscow Patriarchate. And the Moscow Patriarchate at that time was communion with the Ecumenical Patriarchate, which is, again, flagrantly ecumenical. Well, ecumenist. But the Moscow Patriarchate, as of today, right, is no longer communion with the Ecumenical Patriarchate. So this is
Yeah,
no
and
longer
they broke communion over Ukraine. Like, this isn't even honest. Like, they didn't break communion over ecumenism. They didn't say, oh, yes, we're finally freeing ourselves of it. As a matter of fact, as I've mentioned before in previous cases, there was a delegation of the Moscow Patriarchate, which after the breaking communion with Constantinople, went to the GOC Clinicos. This is the largest, GOC, Greek GOC that's involved with this, the making of this document, and tried to, they tried to come in and see if they could negotiate a deal. And the bishops of the GOCK basically politely said, it's nice to see you there, brethren, but have you abandoned ecumenism? And so they walked out with their tail between their legs, and they found some desperate guy running his, it was like one of these breakoffs which had like one building, and they ended up taking him in as a retired bishop or something. I don't remember exactly, but the point is the True Orthodox just basically didn't take them seriously because they weren't serious.
the issue of why ROCOR is got the cooties. But I don't see anyone knocking ROCOR's door. All right, now we can fix this whole situation. Because it's not about that.
And to give an example of a similar situation, after 1054, Constantinople was not in communion with Rome, but other parts of the Orthodox Church remained in communion with Rome for a couple centuries after that.
Exactly. It's if we apply what's in the statement, we'll continue. It just invalidates.
Yeah,
it's
he does.
cutting the branch off at which you're sitting. And
Yeah,
that's what we're seeing.
He does.
This idea for someone else being communion with someone else is not reason to excommunicate. Generally, in church history, you could directly excommunicate the person that's wrong on something, but as long as the other group is, let's say, I'll take a third jurisdiction, like in the Malaysian schism, they're not part of the issue, but they're more tolerant than you are of this offending party. You don't excommunicate the person for being tolerant. You don't see that in church history. So I don't see that as a basis for excommunication. Now they continue the joint statement again, italics. Sergius headed an outwardly proper church organization so that in the hands of the revolutionaries, it could become an unwitting tool in their unrelenting warfare against the very church herself. Sergianism gives a definition, the adoption of the delusion that deception could be used as a means to preserve the truth and that collaboration ensures the church survival. All right, so it condemns Sergianism. That's the definition of Sergianism. It condemns. But here's my response to this. We saw Father Ambrose he's saying there's just one canonized saint within the World Orthodox body that actually condemns Sergianism.
Let's take a break and let's see here. So for whatever reason, the MP will absolutely not adopt the anathema against ecumenism. Correct. It simply won't. Is the schism among the various True Orthodox groups the same as the schism between Moscow and Constantinople? Great question. No, it's not. The reality is that Orthodoxy is by its nature local. So there were problems between different groups in the True Orthodox Church of Greece. There were problems within different groups in the True Orthodox Church of Russia. This exists to a lesser degree in Bulgaria and Romania. But the point is that most of the global problems or difficulties in communion are usually just estrangement. People just were busy trying to survive, and so they ended up out of communion. And that's all being worked on now as we try to make peace with each other, because there was no reason for a division. It's just that communications are not as good as they were. Let me see here. It's funny that Father John says history is messy. So many weird versions of this history. That some of the canonical church had a clear-cut history. Let me see here. I have to work tomorrow morning. Can't wait to see you reading instructional list. Good night, but God bless you. Okay, well, we'll try to put something together. So he thinks the MP has grace, while those who were building churches facing Soviet persecution were graceless, pure insanity. Yeah, that's his position. Got banned from the chat. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Okay, I guess what are you going to do?
By name. I think there'll be more. Ultimately, St. Philaret of New York will ultimately be canonized by ROCOR and stuff like that. So we'll have more that say bad things about Sergius and Sergianism. But we have, at least traditionally, because I'm going to presume the authenticity of the synod of Usklipp, 1937. It was in the catacombs and in secret.
Yeah, this is a good point Liturgical makes. History is a messy argument, but one thing they're sure of is we aren't the church. that part isn't messy. Absolutely. You're confused about whether Roman Catholics are in the church, but we're definitely not the church.
So we are, and the first thing written about it was 10 years later. So some historians wouldn't be solely convinced that it's real, but I'm just going to presume that it's real because it's been historically part of the ROCOR polemic for decades. And here's the heresy of Sergianism as defined by the synodical statement before the True Orthodox left ROCOR.
Well, let me push back on that
Sergianism.
slightly, and that's just that, I know that like Father Stephen Rose in his Russia's Catacomb Saints talks about stuff like that. But if ROCOR recognized that anathema against Sergianism, we would be saying it on the Sunday of Orthodoxy, and we never did.
And indeed, we condemn Ecumenism during those times.
Brother.
But let me just go with this. Being that, again, it's part of the ROCOR polemic. I'm not even judging how official it is. But this is definitely something that it's cited in this True Orthodox document as authoritative. So let's go by the definition of Sergianism that this document that they accept as authoritative states. The heresy of Sergianism is those who teach that the earthly existence of the Church of God can be.
The easy answer to the question, why do World Orthodox always bring that up when Moscow and Constantinople are schism with each other explicitly? The answer is most of them assume you you don't know that. Have a good evening, fellas. I can't stand to listen to these spin doctors anymore. Yeah, I understand.
Be based upon the denial of the truth. Again, those who teach, right? Not what they do precisely. They teach that the earthly existence of the Church of God can be based upon the denial of the truth of Christ, and proclaim that serving God-hating authorities and being faithful to their atheistic commands. So they have to proclaim that that we have to serve God-hating authorities and be faithful through atheism. And I couldn't summarize in very few words. It also says we can't break the canons. So that's the definition of Sergianism given by this council. So what's it condemn? It condemns modernism, renovationism. It condemns overturning canonical precedent. It condemns positively teaching, right? It's not some sort of passive thing, proclaiming and teaching. Positively teaching that the Orthodox Church can, maybe that means must, I don't know Russian, be based upon the denial of the truth of Christ and endorsing atheist authority and atheism. All right? And so by this definition of Sergianism, ROCOR or the Moscow, nor the Moscow Patriarchate today does this. No one is endorsing Sergianism. I'm going to share screen real quick with the 2000 synodical statement from Moscow. So you can say, does Moscow denounce this definition of Sergianism? You'll get to see now with your own eyes. All right, so this is a synodical statement from the Moscow Patriarchate. All right, I got to move. Maybe I made it a little too big. I make it a little smaller. Make it easy. It says, the church remains loyal to the state, but the commandment to fulfill the task of salvation in any situation and under any circumstances above this loyalty. If the authority forces Orthodox believers to apostatize from Christ and his church and to commit sinful and spiritually harmful actions, the church should refuse to obey the state. The Christian found the will of his conscience can refuse to fulfill the commands they force him into a grave sin. If the church and her holy authorities find it impossible to obey state laws and orders, and after due consideration of the problem, they may take the following action: enter direct dialogue with the authority on the problem, call upon the people to use democratic mechanisms to change the legislation or review the authority's decision, apply to international bodies in the world of public opinion, and appeal to our faithful for peaceful civil disobedience. All right, and so I won't belabor that longer, and I'll go back to the PowerPoint here. What we can see is denouncing that they have to endorse atheistic authority. Anything against Christ, they're supposed to reject. That's what the official MP statement on it, and it gets more and more detailed. There's other nuances. It's very, very long.
Yeah, let's take a look here. I didn't see this. I've never seen that video. Someone can send a link. Yeah, it's pretty funny. Yeah, no one's endorsing Sergianism. Meanwhile, Kirill dedicates statues to Sergius. Yeah. Like, the idea is this. What he's basically saying is, okay, the Moscow Patriarchate's current document says that we should not submit to evil authority, so on and so forth. The problem is this: the people that wrote that document already submitted to evil authority, and they trained people how to submit to evil authority. Everyone in Russia considers the Moscow Patriarchate a stooge to the Kremlin. So this is like empty noise. It's an attempt to say that, well, the statement says this, so future generations will be free. Those future generations are trained by your ecumenist Sergianist hierarchy. So they're not going to go off the rails. They're just phrasing things differently. With this, guys, it looks like they are going to go through a lot of stuff, and it's pretty tiresome. I am going to take a quick break. Less than 10 minutes. I'm going to just vanish for a second, if you don't mind, and I'm going to put up a banner, and I will be I'll be out for less than 10 minutes, hopefully, God willing. Okay. Okay, we're back. Let's continue. I don't know how long they're going to go with this, but we're gonna go to the end. Let's go.
The point is, ROCOR nor MP since 2000 endorses Sergianism. And it's really slander to say that they're Sergianist, because the actual official statement,
They literally put up statues to Sergius. Literally, Patrick Kirill considers Sergius a modern confessor. Stop lying to people.
Patriarch Kirill and his fancy little statue somewhere and stuff like that. But we have an official synodical statement that shows that it does not endorse what this synod in 1937 condemns. So that is my point. Now, the synod, this True Orthodox synod in 2014.
Yep, that's what we're reviewing now, Father.
A definition of neo-Sergianism, which is a heresy that only exists in this statement. It's not something that's part of ROCOR's history. Neo-Sergianism is a worldly...
Technically, according to Father John, Sergianism isn't part of ROCOR's history either. So this is like, you guys are so inconsistent.
Unscrupulousness, deception, and a pathological servility towards the powerful of this world, now no longer for fear of reprisals from atheistic rulers, but for the sake of self-serving and secularist motives, peddling the freedom of the church in exchange for gaining friendship with the world, with the powerful of this world. All right, and so I think anyone reading this impartially.
Well, actually, this is a good point. This kind of is, I think, something that a lot of these fighting from within people felt. Craig seems to act as if you guys were like the SIR, everyone would still like you. Whereas in reality, the Greek New Calendarists and others still attacked and lied about the SIR, saying that the SIR were out to trick people and were worse than other True Orthodox. Yeah, absolutely. It's a no-win argument. Even if you joined the SIR, then you had people like Romanides to his death calling you a pseudo-Augustinian cult. So you never win. You never win by dealing like that. Period.
See, this is way too broad a definition of heresy. It's like being friendly to rich and powerful people equals heresy.
But
this is way too broad a definition.
How would the church under the Ottoman Turks not fall under that definition? Because they certainly were cooperating with a government that was persecuting the church. They levied taxes on their people to bribe the Sultan every time they needed to elect a new patriarch, which was a violation of the canons against simony. But you know what? No one in the church condemned Constantinople at that time because they understood, hey, they're in a bad situation. They wouldn't be doing this if they had the freedom not to.
Okay, once again, using the argument of the forced simony that was held during the Ottoman Empire because the Ottomans forced it out of people to basically overtax the population. I think comparing that to the craven submission to the atheistic authorities, it's shameful, really. Yeah, it would so appear. Let's continue.
But were they cooperating with a God-hating government that was persecuting the church? They certainly were. I mean, there's not much left of the Christian population of Turkey and in the Middle East.
He's really trying to argue that the Ottoman sultans were a God-hating population because they killed people. Oh, boy.
And now, obviously, at the end of World War I, when the Ottoman Turks collapsed and the modern state of Turkey arose, there were more Christians then than there are now.
Bishop Enoch correctly points out, simony involves a voluntary act between one or two free acting powers within the church, not being held hostage by the government that isn't the church. Yeah, very true. Thank you. We're continuing.
Oh, but it was still dramatically reduced from what it had been because the church was in this situation not by choice, and the church used various means to put pressure on the people to convert to Islam, and gradually a lot of people caved.
It's whether it's Pierre the Great, whether it's the Old Believers and what happened with them, whether it's again the Ottoman Turks, Byzantine history. If we don't view Orthodoxy as preserved despite overt and integrated political influence over the centuries, it's game over. It's not good enough to say, oh, you're just repeating an old Moscow patriarch polemic. Because yes, a broken clock could be right twice a day. It doesn't mean when it says 12 o'clock, it's wrong. It could actually be 12 o'clock. So the basic fact is, if we subscribe to this view of neo-Sergianism, it's game over. There's no point in us even talking about Orthodoxy being preserved for 2,000 years by anyone. It's
That's not true. You just ignore we exist, but no, it's been preserved. You just don't like that fact.
It's already game over. It's a ridiculous and overly broad. There's this romantic symphonia view versus reality, and the true reality is the state that legalized and persecuted heresies.
It's not a romantic symphonia view. It even existed in the West, which led to the war that led to the creation of the Roman Catholic Church. This is actually standard history.
It sometimes gave major impetus behind the church to do things. Canon law was civil law, so there was I mean, I don't think you get much more integrated than that with the church and the government and the rich and powerful. And so it kind of begs the question, is it symphonia?
Bishop Enoch makes a point validly here. I think it's important to just keep asking these people to write letters to Kirill and others to anathematize ecumenism, because then he'll just throw you out and you'll just get here faster. That's my view. I talked to one former seminarian, actually someone in Petrograd, about that. Yeah, so much for being Orthodox, genuinely the heart. Yep. And when the seminarian wrote, the reply was, ecumenism isn't a heresy. And we're starting to see more and more that these people are saying ecumenism isn't a heresy. And we have to press them on this so they admit that, because then that tells you who they really are. They're ecumenists.
When the doctrines are correct, but Neo-Sergianism when they're wrong. And so essentially Neo-Sergianism becomes this kind of dark foil where you're actually taking something that Orthodox take as Orthodox, symphonia. You're saying, no, it's a kind of heresy.
It is a heresy.
Yeah, obviously you can't have symphonia with evil things. We're not espousing that, but it's not a heresy.
Well, you don't believe in symphonia to begin with.
And so Neo-Sergianism is just this sort of, it's not repeatable. And it's not repeatable. It's not a true idea that you could actually identify as a heresy.
Okay, did he just say it's not? Are you trying to apply the scientific method to heresy? This is silly.
Now, I think that 2014's definition of Sergianism lacks 1937's precision, because the 1937 statement says that it's taught, it's proclaimed, and it includes atheism being proclaimed. These are very specific things that are very, very wrong, which all of us universally condemn.
Except that you don't realize that even the Soviet government pressured the Moscow Patriarchate to begin teaching people to not defend orthodoxy in the face of atheism. Whether you realize it or not, you're defending not just what the Sergianists did, but what the Stalinists did, using the Sergianists as a weapon.
Lacks this. It's much broader because, you got to be broader to condemn ROCOR and to condemn the Moscow Patriarchate these days, because no one is guilty.
John Wrinkle writes, Patriots think you can anathematize the Bolsheviks and their sympathizers. Am I wrong? You are not wrong.
Of the more specific definition, but the more specific definition is repeatable. It's identifiable. I would say it's right. I go, I will concede to 1937 was good. But the point is,
you're not really conceding 1937 Uskut, because then you'd have to admit that the 1943 creation of the Patriarchate was on faulty principles, was deceitful to the Russian people, and worked against the Russian Church. But you don't really believe that.
Sergianism now is not what that synod declares, and that is the problem. So anyway, all these so-called official churches, the True Orthodox statement continues, have now joined decisively, unwaveringly, unrepentantly in the process of syncretistic apostasy of a Sergianist and Ecumenist kind, an anti-ecclesiastical and uncanonical process synodally promoted or permitted by their hierarchies. All right, so again, the uncanonical process promoted or permitted. So you're equally guilty because you're not fighting this and breaking communion with them. False teachers cannot have any prayerful, mysteriological, or administrative communion. So simply permitting others to be ecumenist or neo-Sergianist invalidates ecclesiastical hierarchies and sacramental grace. And we think that's just obviously too far. This is why, because it's worse than Donatism. The Donatists broke communion with those who are apostates and those in communion with apostates, and they were wrong to do that. And they were wrong. But at least they were apostates. Imagine someone saying, "Oh, you're neo-Sergianist, and you now lack grace, so we break communion with you."
Well, that's because you, Craig, refuse to label something heresy. You're actually trying to deconstruct heresy. The Donatists were dealing with apostates, and they were wrong in doing what they dealt with apostates. But there's a difference between apostasy and heresy. By combining these together, it's the common world Orthodox argument and previously Roman Catholic argument that anyone who condemns heresy is actually a Donatist.
Well, it was people that they accused of being apostates, but who denied it. And the thing is, to my knowledge, I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't know that there was a synodal affirmation that the bishop in question actually wasn't a traditor or that he wasn't guilty.
Yeah.
It just simply said that you can't declare the sacraments of a bishop, even if it was true.
This is an important distinction that Bishop Enoch makes, and that's important to remember. The people the Donatists were condemning actually repented. None of these people have repented of anything.
To be without grace, as long as he's acting on behalf of the church, and that's so they are falling into the same heresy. Or worse.
We're technically not, because none of you have repented of anything.
That's an understandable reasons, but again, you could have the right reasons, but still end up on the wrong side of something.
I like how Bishop Enoch is describing this. This would be like if the MP publicly apologized and anathematized Sergius and Sergianism, and ROCOR was like, we don't care. But that never happened. So yeah, very true.
I also think that this sort of view of intra-Orthodox exclusivism contradicts a tangential communion of the Serbians in Jerusalem that existed in the 1990s by everyone's account, right? The Greek True Orthodox using Jerusalem's antimons, the ROCOR priests like yourselves being blessed by your bishop to serve the Serbians, attending where there's multiple bishops and stuff.
You keep saying tangential communion. What was kind of really happening was Jerusalem was attempting to exercise economy, and the Serbian thing was literally condemned by Metropolitan St. Philaret and others. What some ROCOR priests were doing was illegal, and the fact that you keep saying that it was allowed by some bishops just means that those bishops weren't fulfilling what the synod was saying. This is legalism to introduce crime.
St. John, where they're allowing clergy from the World Orthodox jurisdictions. This is where, and with all due respect, the sort of reinvention that ROCOR was totally walled off from all World Orthodox, again, against what everyone recollects, what everyone was doing, is a sort of reinvention of history, all right? And a reinvention of history with a very specific polemical end to justify that, yes, you could be completely cut off from the World Orthodox and somehow be canonically regular. But again, it's just not justifiable. It's not found in the history.
Yep.
So that aside, the joint TO statement continues. The Constitution, and we have this interesting the True Orthodox served in Jerusalem until recently. So, all right, please list your sources. I'm very interested in that question.
And why are they not heretics that have been destroyed by the fact they were in communion with people who were in communion with people who were heretics?
Because again, we already know that's wrong. But
because of the fact that Patriarch Diodorus realized how wrong Ecumenism was, and then Constantinople persecuted him till his death. This is stupid.
All right, that aside. The TO statement continues, the constitution and continuation of the local True Orthodox churches was ensured by hierarchs from among the innovators, new calendars joining them, following the confession of orthodoxy, of course, by the consecration of bishops, by a True Orthodox ecclesiastical authority, and the diaspora having indisputable apostolic succession. Let me just go here. True Orthodox Church does not provide assurance concerning their validity or concerning their soteriological efficacy, meaning the holy orders of the World Orthodox. In particular, for those who commune knowingly with syncretistic Ecumenism and Sergianism, even though she does not in every instant repeat their external form for those entering communion with her in repentance. So meaning, like St. Philaret of New York said about the Moscow Patriarchate, that we will accept the form of their holy orders, but we don't accept that they have grace. That was his view. And I think if
that was all the True Orthodox view, but one thing that's important here is that this undermines a very important statement that Craig was trying to make before, which is that the True Orthodox started something. Whereas this document clearly says that they were attempting to continue the apostolic succession and continue the preservation of the true faith. So even now, Craig's original point that they made up something is undermined by the very documents. He's ascribing to us things we don't believe.
I remember right, Father, he said he doesn't believe it. He didn't say this is the view of everyone within his time.
He specifically said, I don't impose this view on anyone else, but that is my opinion. But his opinion was actually a little bit more nuanced than that, because he believed that there were people that
this was before the 1983 statement against ecumenism, and I feel like Father John's about to lie about what St. Philaret said.
Moscow Patriarchate who were true believers, so he believed that they had grace.
He believed old women in the pews of the Moscow Patriarchate had grace. That's your argument.
And so that being said, because like I said, I think his issue is more intra-Russian, and the True Orthodox converts project that there's these larger, more interjurisdictional ramifications, and that's going beyond what their actual, much more narrow concerns were, I think.
Well, this is, again, a made-up version of history. There were actual True Orthodox in these other countries who eventually established hierarchies and communion. So to imply that, oh, well, everyone else just made it up, even though it was only in Russia and Greece, is a lie. Stop lying.
Right.
So that being said, in this response about how they receive people and it's only because they have the form of ordinations, there's some implicit admission to canonical irregularity on their part, because they're already admitting, yep, our holy orders are made of people without grace, and the ROCOR pretty much coming in here and giving us bishops, which we already established, began in a canonically irregular way. Right? So there's this admission that the whole church originates from canonical irregularity. And there's this, we can't, they'll mean in a mean way, and we'll see when we end. I'm really not trying to be mean about it, it's just reality. But it's worth pointing out that
no, you are trying to be mean about it. We don't point to flaws in your own ordinations, even the mess in Greece. This is your gotcha. It's pathetic.
No movement that ever saved the whole church has been walled off from all the canonically regular churches as far as we know. Keyword as far as we know. Diatheletism is
well, let's see here. Bishop Enoch says, if the Fanar MP schism got to the World Orthodox to admit one thing, it's that the communion with a patriarchate doesn't mean you're Orthodox. For years, they acted as that as one of the defining characteristics. Yeah, I'd say that that's also kind of Craig's default position as well.
a lot of unknowns, like we talked about. The synods were under caliphate persecution.
No movement as far as we know. Yeah, I don't know that's first off, nobody believes in true orthodoxy that we were walled off from all of the canonically regular churches. This is your made up statement on our beliefs. It doesn't reflect what we teach, and it's stupid.
They didn't get to regularly elect patriarchs during those days. So it's somewhat unclear. But as far as we know, that's never occurred. All right. And that's important to point out. This would be totally unprecedented. It would be an innovation, in fact, because it's never occurred.
That's not true. Well, yes, if it was your made up thing that we broke communion with all of the church, then yeah, that would be unprecedented. But no one believes that. You're lying.
Before. Now, true orthodoxy hinges on ROCOR ordinations, but the former, as we pointed out, recognized the World Orthodox ordinations in those churches.
World Orthodoxy did not exist at that time in that form. World Orthodoxy is a marketing statement made up by Father John Meyendorff in the late 1970s. No one's talking about World Orthodoxy, just confusion in the Orthodox world. The idea that we recognize there were innovators and non-innovators, and the innovators eventually got together, continued to consolidate their stuff with government help, and then called themselves World Orthodoxy. It didn't exist, man.
They even excommunicated the Greek old calendars over that question. And they reconciled with them when that question was being resolved. Now, we see
wait, who excommunicated them? Go back.
Calendars over that question. Recognized the World Orthodox ordinations in those churches. True orthodoxy hinges on ROCOR ordinations, but the former, as we pointed out, recognized the World Orthodox ordinations in those churches. They even excommunicated the Greek old calendars over that question.
The ROCOR never excommunicated the Greek old calendarists. He's lying.
And they reconciled with them when that question was being resolved. Now, we see
another interesting thing is Subdeacon Atarius Harrison's book on the relationship between ROCOR.
Meyendorff was part of the Metropolia, which would eventually become the OCA.
From the old calendarists, interestingly, provides positive proof that Metropolitan Anthony Kropovitsky and Metropolitan Anastasi never believed that we should go into communion with the Greek old calendarists. And
that's a real what's the word I'm looking for? Over exaggeration. Yeah. Okay. I can't remember the actual state. It was quoted by Father Seraphim in he was quoting a magazine that the OCA puts out.
So you can't say that this is this is old ROCOR was all agreeing with Metropolitan Filaret when old ROCOR manifestly did not agree with that. And there was crazy stuff going on in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, and 50s, and 60s.
Yeah, lots of murder and stuff.
While those two Metropolitans were, running ROCOR. But
Russians were being killed by the thousands by the Stalinists that Father John now supports. The Greeks were being persecuted left and right by the state church, which was its own uncanonical creation, and eventually would become even more uncanonical in the 70s, which Craig supports.
Metropolitan Anthony Kropovitsky opposed the new calendar. He thought that it was a grave mistake, but he admonished an Athonite monk that was writing him that it was wrong for him to stop commemorating his patriarch.
Are you therefore admitting that Mount Athos stopped commemorating the patriarch in the 1930s?
We also have the statement from Letter 250 of St. Seraphim Rose, where he says, our church...
Don't forget the mass slaughter in Romania. I know. Yeah, I know. These are all facts that they don't want to deal with. They just ignore them and then claim that, they're lying, even though the facts are on paper. We have the records. This is all silly.
Church as a whole, and certainly almost all bishops and priests, apart from the Boston wing. So again, repeat. Certainly, right? So he's pretty sure of this. Almost all bishops and priests does not believe Moscow and new calendars to be without grace. Those who wish to believe this as their personal opinion are not persecuted for it, but they certainly cannot make such an opinion obligatory on others.
That's a great quote, and that's positive proof that when people say old ROCOR was like Metropolitan Filaret, that's just not the case. You've got St. Seraphim verifying this for us.
Even though St. Seraphim's words had to be re-edited in his books because he said only the Russian church abroad and the old calendarists were holding the faith.
And that was always my impression when I was in ROCOR from the very beginning, was that this was the view of most people and that the other view was a fringe view. And I think...
Yeah, this is true. Very simple. They had to kill a lot of people just to prop up ecumenism in these countries. Not false.
A case can be made, and I think it's probably true, that the extreme opinions in ROCOR were largely the result of the what became the Hawknicism or the Panalamonites being in ROCOR from sometime around like 1969 or something. they had a very poisonous effect. And Father Saffron Rose adamantly opposed them. At first, he had cordial correspondences with them, but it became very clear to him that they were extreme.
But Father Seraphim knew the difference between the Panalamonites, the true Orthodox in Greece, and would treat them differently accordingly.
And he wrote against their mentality frequently.
Uh-huh.
And it's just worth pointing out, 90%, maybe more, of ROCOR went to Moscow Patriarchate. It's probably that, again, that almost all, that proportion of people that never bought into World Orthodox, totally void of grace, totally got the cooties. Right? It's not out of nowhere that 90% went to communion, right? They always had some sort of intellectual precedent that made that possible. And we'll get a little more to that a little later. That being said, I read the book. It's not too long. It's The Grace of God Present in the Soviet Church. It's pretty much about true Orthodox exclusivism. I'll call him Blessed Ivan Andreev. I can't pronounce it.
I believe.
He's a confessor of the faith. He appears to have had some feeling of some experience, rather, of theosis. So I will call him Blessed. And so he published a book.
Why are they piling on all of these honorifics on Ivan Andreev? It looks like they're about to attack him.
Translate to English on this question.
He was a professor at Jordanville for many years, if I remember correctly.
Yes, into the 70s. So I think from the 40s to the 70s. And his grave is still there. Probably walked past.
Oh, let's skip the honorifics. This is true. 90% wasn't this after all these breaks and all these people leaving and dying off? Was it 90%? That's a good question, Politica. They deny that we exist in the millions and pretend we're just tiny splinters because that's what they do. They have to defend lies.
Past all the time, and I can't read Russian, so I don't know who it is. But that being said, he says a couple statements I think are helpful for us on this question. And he says this: the patriarch, which he puts in quotation marks, Alexei, was acknowledged by all Eastern patriarchs. But even if all Eastern patriarchs acknowledge falsehood for truth, the falsehood would not thereby become truth. So there's a few things going on here. All right. We see some circular reasoning to extent like, yes, I agree. You can't, with everyone agreeing, make something false true. But then what is our way of discerning the truth other than just open up all the history books, right?
Yeah, that's the way to do it. But unfortunately, this is something that's new to you since you didn't accept that we existed.
Consensus is something that determines a question. The faith held everywhere, consented to by all, like St. Vincent de Lérins says, right? There was a Vincentian canon on this, a consensus-based ecclesiology, right? So if all the patriarchs during a problem recognize that, yes, this person is an actual bishop, this does show that the consensus of the church recognizes that there's grace there. Doesn't mean they didn't endorse everything Patriarch Alexei did. They didn't condemn the Uskut Council. There's lots of things they didn't do, but they recognized Patriarch Alexei. And so in order to argue that all the world's patriarchs, as Blessed Ivan admits, are wrong, you start running into the sort of issues where you start taking apart historical Orthodox ecclesiology, which is what I studied. It has to do with our apologetics against Roman Catholicism.
I will mention that your book conveniently leaves out the problems of canonicity and unity when it talks about the 11th century. You kind of glossed over that, but that's cool.
Right? How do I identify the majesty of the church if it's not for the consensus of the whole church? That's what we read about in Acts 15. So this is an issue I absolutely cannot budge on. So
sure. Unseen Warfare says, according to James 3:15-16, the practice of slander is demonic. People engaged in slandering other people are led by demons, not the Spirit of God. Very true.
Yes, we need antiquity. It can't be just like everyone in the present believing something. But we have to believe if everyone in the present consents to something that's wrong, then the gates of hell prevent.
But Bishop Enoch points out, MP writers say today that if all the patriarchs recognized Domenko, they wouldn't care.
Against church. And we can't believe that to be possible and hold that the Orthodox Church has the truth. So what we see the true Orthodox unwittingly doing is undercutting the witness of the Orthodox Church and opening up the Orthodox Church to accusations that.
Well, no, those are real. They're not accusations. Your bishops are ecumenists. You're lying and covering for them. We are not undercutting anything. We are proclaiming the Orthodox faith, and you can't handle it.
They've fallen into categorical error. But the weird thing is, on top of this, is Blessed Ivan recognizes all these other Eastern patriarchs because, right, this is the 40s. There was no polemic at this point that the whole world Orthodox Church has got the cooties and they're not the church. He recognizes them as actual patriarchs. So here's this book that is cited that, look, this proves that the grace of God is.
Can I just say something, sweet Lord? I'm so tired of hearing this, but cooties is a term used by children to describe something unreal. Stop sounding like stupid people.
It's not present in the Moscow Patriarchate because, again, that was the polemic of St. Philaret. That is the polemic of Blessed Ivan. They don't believe that church had grace. But even they, whose witness the modern true Orthodox depend upon to prove, right, that the world Orthodox lack grace, they're not the church, did not believe what the world or the true Orthodox believe today about that. And
That's not true. It's that simple.
this is a passage that shows that to be the case. Now, there's another passage that stuck out to me, which is this: that the whole fullness, unspeakable
What do you do? Skim?
spiritual beauty of the invisible, secret Russian Catacomb Church will become obvious to the world only then, when the God-fighting Soviet government and the Soviet Church, spiritually enslaved by them, will disappear. So this is, for one, he's saying when the Soviet Union's gone, the real church will be there for everyone to see. All right, so this.
Well, keep in mind, now this is where it gets interesting, but we're going to, before we touch this, let me see here. These people need to be asked, why are so many of these people terrified of anathematizing ecumenism? This needs to be constantly pressed. They simply won't. Very true. It's a rhetorical technique. Talk about it in a childish way to immediately make the opponent look ridiculous. But it's looking ridiculous now.
Take, like Father John was saying, here's someone who's teaching at Jordanville for decades. All right, so all these clergy coming out of Jordanville between the 40s and the 70s are going to be imbibing in ideas like these. And what this quote doesn't show, but if you read the surrounding pages, the polemic is that the Catacomb Church, though in the shadows, actually outnumbers. It's bigger than the Moscow Patriarchate Church.
I point you to evidence in 2009, the Moscow Patriarchate caused the state to take away 9 major churches of the ROAC by force. This is something that happens today. This has been happening with ROCOR continuing parishes that are not part of the Moscow Patriarchate. The Moscow Patriarchate has been using the state to take away buildings and to physically persecute people. So this is not an issue of there's a numbers issue or who has more people. It's an issue of when the True Orthodox continue to grow, the Moscow Patriarchate works with the state to damage their witness, to steal their buildings and harass their people. This is the modern face of the Moscow Patriarchate today. And for people to say, oh, well, maybe they were just basing it on fantasies while stealing their buildings and persecuting their people, maybe you guys are heretical liars or hypocritical liars. Sorry. Anyway.
All right, that the fake Moscow Patriarchate Church is just a paper church. It has fake KGB bishops. It doesn't have real believers. And this will be clear to everyone once the Iron Curtain falls, and then the Russian Catacomb Church is obvious for all to see. Now,
and this actually is another issue that my views did change at a certain point. But
okay, and I will add to this because I know they're going to propagandize about this finally. When the Iron Curtain fell, hundreds and thousands of people joined the ROCOR under the aegis of the Free Russian Orthodox Church, which eventually became ROAC and RTOC. These were hundreds of thousands of people. It was a huge thing. There were huge catacomb communities that still survive today, that the Moscow Patriarchate has paid trolls that have to go after and put in nasty comments in like every video that they put up in Russia. It's embarrassing. It is embarrassing how afraid they are of us.
But it was long before Metropolitan Batali's time ended in ROCOR. There was Joseph McClellan. He was a pious layman, but then later an archimandrite. He became the head of the ecclesiastical mission in the Holy Land. Very well educated, brother-in-law of Father George Loris, by the way. And I remember making some kind of statement about the Catacomb Church and him saying, look, the Catacomb Church, and he was a historian. The Catacomb Church really, for the most part, ceased to exist after Patriarch Alexei's election. Well, the Catacomb Church really, for the most...
I want to address the comment that's on the screen from the propagandist there. Alexander Solzhenitsyn was trying to say in his time, all catacomb people were coming under parishes under Alexei I. That is absolutely true. He had every... Alexander Solzhenitsyn said that many times. Metropolitan St. Philaret actually replied saying that he was misguided and that he was incorrect because they spoke to people within the catacomb communities, which they did. And what Priest Ambrose is missing here is that Alexander Solzhenitsyn was trying to push the idea of uniting the old believers to the Russian Church abroad, and the old believers were already compromised by the Soviets. Yeah.
Most part ceased to exist after Patriarch Alexei's election. Well, Ivan Andreev, he wasn't there for that. He was out of the Soviet Union by the time World War II was over. And there were a lot of people in ROCOR like that. They remembered the Soviet Union of the 1930s. And so they assumed that reality was still the way that it was.
Oh, it's better now. Soviet Union is better now, of course. That's your argument, even though the catacomnics were still being persecuted? Oh, you sound like a Soviet propagandist, Father.
But it's just not the reality. What happened with the Catacomb Church was it was like, if you take a balloon and you squeeze one side, the other side gets bigger, and then when you squeeze the other side, this side gets bigger. Well, when the Soviets went after the Catacomb church, I mean, when they went after the above ground church, the Catacomb church would balloon. But then when they would
but then they would persecute the underground church too. They were constantly trying to infiltrate them, find them, and execute them.
go of it and relax things a little bit, and churches were allowed to reopen, people started going back to the churches that were open. Yeah. And when Patriarch Alexei was elected,
Enoch makes a valid point here in practical terms. Active membership of the MP in Russia and active True Orthodox in Russia is not so distant as to not affect each other. This means one conversion from the MP to the True Orthodox in Russia leads to effects. It does. It actually does.
Most people recognized it as a legitimate election, including St. John. He never, despite what people say, he never later said, I was wrong. He was not really legitimately elected. He just simply was obedient to the synod that he had pledged obedience to, which was ROCOR.
Now, this being said, a lot of the people, I would say the children of the whites, meaning, the Russian immigrants and the children of those who escaped Russian as refugees because they were persecuted, and those who escaped with the Germans eventually left Germany and got to America.
Yeah, this is why there's so much danger. They say exactly. We're actually a very big threat to the status quo right now. So
right, the ethnic body of ROCOR, right? Like that's what ROCOR started with, especially in the United States. Right, those people and their children would visit the USSR. I spoke to one of these individuals. I'll be vague, just because she's not asking to be part of the show in any way. And so,
they found an MP member who's old and is going to defend their position, but she didn't want to be on camera.
Get visas to go travel visas to the USSR, and they bring icons and, of course, Jordanville material and stuff to, the love bomb, the USSR, because they were evangelizing the fake MP church. They're the impression that it was all a facade. Because this is everything you're brought up believing. It was just all facade.
You're still forgetting the Free Russian Orthodox Church that was a result of that you don't want to talk about existing.
They're not real churches, not real biblical believers. And the USSR did themselves no favors because they would assign spies to go after these people. So, this person recalls that this Armenian came up to her, because it's the USSR, and Armenians, of course, speak Russian, and, strike a conversation and stuff. Oh, you go to church? I'll go to church with you. And, it becomes pretty obvious this person's your spy. It's like in Rocky IV, where the guys in the Mercedes follow Rocky wherever he trains. This person follows you wherever you go because you're...
The term you're looking for is handler.
This subversive element. And so that just feeds into the paranoia that everything's fake. It's like the Truman Show of churches, pretty much. And
that's because it was fake, because it was run by the KGB. The Catacomb Church of the Russian Church abroad are preserving true orthodoxy, not following the path of the MP, the blind servant of the godless authority. Orthodox Russia, number 21, 1970. Thank you, Unseen Warfare, for that quote. Let's continue.
And so, again,
there's a proto-deacon that I know that told me when he visited the Soviet Union in the 70s that he had some minder that was following him everywhere he went.
Yeah.
And at a certain point, he went to an ice cream stand and got 2 ice cream cones, and he held one behind his back, and then the minder came and took it.
Yeah,
so this was standard routine.
He was good buddies with his handler. He's so cute.
During the Soviet period. But and the thing is, Ivan Andreev, he suffered. I mean, he was confessor of the faith,
yep.
And he suffered through some very horrendous times before he was able to exit the Soviet Union. And so he did not have a dispassionate view of the players. And a lot of these people,
he didn't have time to give ice cream to his handler.
He blamed the bishops of the Moscow Patriarchate because they saw them as defending the Soviet Union. And I think it's understandable that some people...
They weren't just defending the Soviet Union, they were defending the persecution of the Orthodox people. That should bother you. And it doesn't. I used to think that it did bother you, but it doesn't.
Would view things that way when you've seen people suffer and you see these people who you think are going along with the Soviets, and you don't realize that they're suffering too. Because the bishops of the Moscow Patriarchate didn't get a free ride.
Sympathy for the MP, those poor Soviet sympathetic bishops killing off the Orthodox and reporting them into jail. Those poor Soviet bishops. I feel so bad for them. They need ice cream.
Many of them wound up being killed. As a matter of fact, there was Metropolitan Joseph of Petrograd, Father Joseph Sweden's named for, and he likes to complain that the Moscow Patriarchate is not recognized. And well, I'm the editor of the St.
Bro, I'm not complaining. I'm not complaining at all. I think that would deepen the lie. I think you should glorify Sergius.
The liturgical calendar, and I can tell you that the Jordanville calendar has him on there, as does the St. Innocent calendar. So, and we commemorate him out loud in our services.
Dude, ROCOR is probably not going to exist in 20 years. ROCOR MP, the real ROCOR will still exist, but this MP farce, I mean, I hate to say it, but just even if something like a Brother Nathaniel can cause worldwide chaos in your synod, your rapidly shrinking synods, then yeah, I don't think you're as stable as you think you are, guys.
Anyway, when he was martyred along with St. Cyril of Kazan, and I believe it was a higher martyr Eugene or something like that, but they were shot together. And those three bishops basically represented three factions. One was the Metropolitan Sergius is a traitor faction. One was under Metropolitan Sergius, and then you had Saint Cyril Kazan that took the middle ground and said Sergius is wrong, but I'm not going to condemn him. And they were all shot together.
I'm still not certain if this is. I think he might be talking about Hilarion Troitsky, but I'm not sure that. I think that the whole support for Sergius thing might be MP propaganda.
Together, and I remember reading somewhere that they blessed each other as they were about ready to be shot. I wish I knew where that was recorded, because I would love to be able to point people to the source. But I think that in their deaths they were united.
Now remember, like Blessed Yvonne is saying, once the Iron Curtain falls, we'll all see this Catacomb church, and we'll see how fake the other church is. And as I was saying, people.
It actually is what happened. You're covering it up. The history of the Frock and Roac and Artok, this literally goes through that literally happening. You guys are denying it happened. That's why the ROCOR MP eventually, before they became part of the MP, they broke communion with all of their free Russian churches, hundreds of thousands of people. Now they estimate it's in the millions. It may not be like the official numbers of the MP, but when you consider the official numbers of the MP that actually attend church, it's pretty similar. So yeah, he's going to tell you it's not real, but it is.
People in ROCOR who visit the USSR are under this idea, right, that it's a Truman Show church over there. So there's that imagination.
Well, Yekaterinburg was literally a Truman Show kind of Orthodox world. So yeah.
Versus reality. Now they're already Alexander Solzhenitsyn, how do you pronounce his name? He called it a pious dream.
Solzhenitsyn.
As far as I know, St. Philip in New York said, no, you're wrong. There's definitely catacomb bishops and all that. So Iron Curtain falls. ROCOR returned to Russia in the 1990s. There was not this huge catacomb church entered a communion with. Right?
Except there was. Bishop Lazar was famous for kind of tearing apart the catacomnist ordinations, etc. But it actually did exist, and there were hundreds of thousands of people who did join the Free Russian Orthodox Church.
It was something that, as you said with the balloon, it's just people, when they couldn't worship freely as Orthodox, they had to do it underground.
Well, what's interesting is
it's like during COVID, and when they're able to go to church like normal, they went to church like normal. It's not that complicated.
Under Metropolitan Vitali, ROCOR.
By the way, what you're seeing on the screen as it describes it, my guess is this led to a reevaluation, is precisely the argument that Archbishop Mark used to attack the Free Russian Orthodox Church. Even though he knew exactly what was happening, he referred dismissively to the people that joined the Free Russian Orthodox Church and the True Orthodox Church. He referred to them as Sovietized, that they weren't truly Russians, and the best part of Russia was in the Moscow Patriarchate. So the point is, this propaganda, they're literally following it to a T. They're literally all they're doing is basically saying what Archbishop Mark said at the time to demonize the Free Russian people. So this is ironic. This is interesting.
Did not recognize the legitimacy of any old calendar bishop. A catacomb bishop. So they did secretly consecrate some bishops for the catacomb church as they understood it.
Yeah,
but they didn't recognize there being any catacomb bishops left.
That would be Archbishop
so I think that's something
position.
that's a reality that you have to deal with. Is they thought that there was this big group of catacomnics that were still around, and there probably were some, but they just were not very numerous. And Alexander Solzhenitsyn, you can't accuse him of being an apologist for the Soviet Union, because he did more to let the people in the West know about the horrors of the Soviet gulags than anybody else.
So my point is, imagine growing up, you've heard about your parents, your grandparents' persecutions.
Now, this is an interesting point, because one thing to remember, let me see here. It was interesting. It's mostly over. But one thing I thought was really interesting about this, the claim about Solzhenitsyn. Solzhenitsyn was a very pro-Russian writer. One could ascribe to it pro-Russian sentiments, but what he says what Father John says here is kind of odd, because what he says is Solzhenitsyn would never say something pro-Soviet, but the Soviet position after Brezhnev, the thawing position, was that they were going to try to be more open and admit the wrongdoings of previous Soviet administrations, most notably Stalin and the gulags. The gulags still existed, but they were going to be more, they weren't going to be as crazy and murderous. They were just using them as prisons. So the whole point is, Solzhenitsyn, as much as he is a valuable writer, etc., could theoretically, even if, I hate to say this, he wouldn't be following Soviet policy, and eventually I think he did leave in exile. But the point is, He wouldn't technically be following Soviet policy directly, but he would still officially be following the Brezhnevite Soviet policy. Misinformation is all. So numbers equate to truth. How ignorant. Yeah, and he's lying about the numbers too.
And you have no reason to doubt it. You go back, you're being spied on and everything, so it all just seems like a big old facade. So it's everything you know, right? It's going along with it. And then you realize it's not true. It's like that's a major bubble popping. It's like finding Santa Claus isn't real. And so my guess, because again, I was alive at the time, but I was not Orthodox. I was a kid in the 90s, right? You know, so my guess is this led to a reevaluation. When I speak to, again, the people that were ROCOR for decades, their whole life, all right? When I speak to people that have been in ROCOR their whole lives, essentially, there's like, they tell the story like how it unfolds here. And then there's essentially saying, but then people come back from Russia in recent times, and people are faithful. They're going to church. They're doing feast days. It's not this big facade. They're Christians like we're Christians. And
let's get something straight here. He's again referring to True Orthodoxy as a monolith as opposed to a worldwide organization. He's also referring to ROCOR as a unified body, which in many cases it wasn't. So let's continue. And he said, Bishop Enoch says Solzhenitsyn wasn't a theological writer either. Why would he care about these issues like Ecumenism or modernism? He was more Russian political writer and who just liked going to church. Yeah, pretty much. All right.
That led to a sort of a painful, but a sort of agreeable attitude to go, all right, we accept they're a church. We don't have reason not to be communion with anymore. And so here are my tentative conclusions. I say tentative because I have not done a super careful study. I do not put myself up as this expert on the issue.
You're not, and on top of that, you're propagandizing.
But my tentative conclusions are that True Orthodoxy changed its ethos from the 30s to 60s. I mean, it clearly did.
No, True Orthodoxy didn't change its ethos. World Orthodoxy changed its ethos by continually promoting modernism, the calendar, and eventually recognition of the Roman Catholic Church, as well as hiding the persecution of the Russian Catacomb Church. We didn't change our ethos. World Orthodoxy was forming, and you were falling away.
Recognize the World Orthodox churches as legitimate churches and whatnot. But ROCOR's ethos changed as well, right? As we just said, ROCOR's ethos was developed and created by all these refugees of people persecuted.
The bishops of the church were increasingly divided. There was infiltration of the ROCOR in the 60s and 70s. We've had this discussion. This led to all the schisms.
By the Soviets, right? So, yeah, that changes too, especially with a lot of the reality on the ground changing from what it was in the 30s and 20s and 40s and even in the 60s.
That's true.
We
were adapting to the circumstances. Yeah.
Can I just finish one point?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
But my argument is ROCOR seems to have more continuity with the 30s and 60s than the True Orthodox have themselves in the 30s and 60s. Because at the end of the day, ROCOR now recognizes the World Orthodox churches like ROCOR then recognized World Orthodox churches. Right? The real difference is just...
But it's not that simple. And in the 30s and 60s, often the ROCOR didn't recognize the World Orthodox churches, and the World Orthodox churches didn't recognize the ROCOR.
The recognition of what exactly was going on in Russia. And from all intents and purposes, what Blessed Ivan was looking to be vindicated with actually didn't occur. So it's people holding
Except it actually did occur. Craig, you're lying. Learn some history.
Onto the reality of something that manifestly was not true, I think actually does violence to...
Again, let's not talk about what manifestly is not true when you're saying things that are manifestly untrue.
Saints like his memory. So anyway, that's my thoughts on that, Father. Let me give you the floor.
I think if you talked about sort of a change in ROCOR, I would say certainly today in ROCOR, you're not going to find anyone who says the...
This is an interesting comment. Yellowfish writes, it's crazy to me how World Orthodox are using the same insults that Catholics and other opponents in general have used against Orthodoxy for years, like terminally online or conspiracists. Very true. Good night. God bless. Thank you, Vladika Benedicite. Let's continue.
Moscow Patriarchate has no grace because we're commemorating the Patriarch. And there were people that had that view back then, but the Russian Church abroad never officially said the Moscow Patriarchate has no grace. That never happened. And I defy anybody to produce the synodal decree that says that they said any such thing. They certainly were critical. But the thing is, when we started talking to people from inside Russia, after beginning when the dialogue really started under Metropolitan Loras, and for example, I encourage everybody to read Everyday Saints by Metropolitan Tikhon Shevchenov, because in that book you're given a perspective from what did people who were actually inside Russia from starting from around World War II and up until the present time, how did they deal with the situations that they were in? And I think that we certainly did come to have a little bit more sympathy for those people. And again, I go back to Father George Lauren. What he said, I didn't agree with what he said at the time about the Moscow Patriarchate, but his attitude,
Father George Lauren is the dad of Sister Vasa Lauren, if you're not familiar, known for her Coffee with Vasa series here on YouTube.
We're in their position, we would have done worse. That is a true Orthodox position on these things, because it's easy for us, and particularly all these online true Orthodox folks that want to pontificate about this stuff. I mean, most of these people are not even old enough to remember when the Soviet Union was around, and they might have been born long after it ceased to exist.
Yeah, that's true about the Ottoman Empire, but we see you pontificating on it and comparing it to the Soviets when you weren't even you weren't. I don't think you even went to Russia until the Soviet Union fell, if I remember correctly.
So it's easy for us to sit back and say, well, those dirty dogs should have done this. They should have been prepared to be, martyred rather than to make
dirty dogs. You dirty dog. That's Norm Macdonald. I thought that was hilarious. But anyway.
Make any kind of compromise with those dirty dogs. Well, it's easy to say that, but if you were in that situation, you might not have done that. You might have done even worse than those people did. So maybe it's not such a good idea to judge harshly people that have been in situations that you haven't been in.
Don't judge the Soviets so harshly.
Someone like Ivan Andreev, actually was in situations like that, so they would have a little bit more credibility.
Oh yeah, someone like who walks the room, you shut up, you listen.
Right.
To kind of finish up my notes, I'm gonna make another apology because, of course, what I just unfolded is gonna proceed as protracted attack upon true Orthodoxy,
which it was, filled with lies and misrepresentations, you name it.
Which again really was a defense of why the video is titled, why I'm not true Orthodox, why we're not true Orthodox. Now, I just want to say I'm very much open to correction. I'm probably simplifying things. Honestly, not getting sucked into a whirlpool of anti-Orthodox despair. I think the proceeding is fair with the details. It's...
What does that mean, a whirlpool of anti-Orthodox despair? That if we're right, you're so committed to your position, you'd become anti-Orthodox and despairing? You dirty dog.
I didn't do a PhD dissertation and stuff, but it's not that I'm distorting details here. I do think any true Orthodox reply to this should not focus on attacking my person, but it needs to address the first millennium and tangential communion, not pretend the stuff didn't exist.
We did literally not only covered that, we've mentioned it many times. We recommend a book on it, The History of Resistance by Subdeacon Nectarius, because it covers the first millennium.
Right, because it's all about how bad I am, supposedly, and how all this other...
No one cares about how bad you are. That's your ego talking, bro. You dirty dog.
The stuff didn't exist, then you just conceded everything. So it shows you can't address the facts.
For the record, the dirty dog thing, that's Norm Macdonald. I just think it's one of the funniest phrases I've ever heard. You dirty dog. It's just funny. All right, let's finish this.
So I feel that's where positive dialogue could move forward.
Yep.
Now I'm going to end this kind of my statements before we do audience questions with an olive branch. And my olive branch is, the true Orthodox can still be right. Now, Father John might not agree with this, but I want to take a teaching from history, and for the sake of our own humility and salvation, the true Orthodox can still be right. Why? Well, let's look at the examples of Saints Maximus and Martin of Rome. Both died outside the regular canonical boundaries of the church. St. Martin was deposed. St. Maximus was deposed.
Also, Saint Mark of Ephesus, also, and there's others as well.
They supported canonically irregular ecclesiastical programs due to the end of the world. Right? So it's like, they were supporters of these canonically irregular churches of their day. They were not mentioned once by the Sixth Ecumenical Council, neither one. And that's why, by the way, because why would all these canonical churches who have to deal with all these broken pieces from the work of these men going to be very happy about what they did when that's all in very recent memory? So when endorsing their doctrine, they never endorsed the men. Yet these are the chief saints and the heroes of this era. These saints who are on the outs, even the Ecumenical Council, aren't mentioned, are vindicated by history and by our veneration. So I want to caution everyone to judge nothing before the time until the Lord comes, as the scripture says, that there's going to be saints ultimately on both sides of this question. I don't know how long. I don't know if there's true Orthodox saints today. It's not for me to judge. But because we know of things like this occurring in the past, we need to take a step back and be careful not to condemn someone who's on the right side of something when there is a canonical irregularity that separates them from us. Because again, we were in communion 20 years ago. We're not talking about ancient history. And God willing, there will be reconciliation 20 years
All
from
right,
now.
you know what? I will say this. Sunrise says, honestly, Father, if you weren't reviewing this, I couldn't listen to it. It's painful. You're right. This looks like it's done. So at least the last 10 minutes have a thing that says become a missionary. So I'm going to assume there's nothing left of any substance to say on this, and I'm going to let it go. I want to thank everyone for listening. Again, thanks to everyone, to our listeners, to all our commenters, to those who asked questions and had comments, and those who support our mission. Support the channel. We at NFTU need your help. Support us by subscribing or donating at nftu.net, on Give, Send, Go, or on Odyssey. We remember all of you in our prayers, and thank you for all the support for NFTU. And as always, don't forget to like and subscribe through the prayers of Holy Fathers. So Jesus Christ, our God, have mercy on us and save us. You have a great night, everyone.